Good afternoon and welcome to the Cambridgeshire County Council's Children and Young People's Committee. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today. If the alarm sounds, I'll adjourn the meeting and we will all leave the room by the side doors and use the fire exit situated carefully between the toilet and the kitchen, which will lead to the external stairs to the car park and assembly point. To facilitate discussion, I intend to waive the committee procedure rule limiting members' contributions to 5 minutes, and I will also allow members to speak more than once on an item if appropriate. However, please make sure your contributions remain relevant and concise. We do have a long agenda today. I will adjourn the meeting every 2 hours for a short comfort break. I'd like to remind members and officers that all meetings will be live streamed and a recording of this meeting will be published on the Council's website. So, agenda item 1, apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Rishenda, can you report any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies for absence from Councillor Hay and also from Councillor Count, who was hoping to substitute for Councillor Hay, but unfortunately he's unwell today. We've also had apologies from Dr. Andy Stone, who is the Roman Catholic Diocese of East Anglia's nominee for its co-opted member on the committee.
Councillor Hoy?
Yeah, Councillor Prentice has just come over unwell. He sat downstairs and he said that if he's well again, he will come back, but if he doesn't, that's why. He obviously did hope to be here, but it's just suddenly come over unwell.
We send our wishes to all of those who are unwell today. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest today, please? Nope. So next we are asked next is the co-option of a representative from the Roman Catholic Diocese of East Anglia. We're being asked to co-opt Dr. Andy Stone from the Diocese of East Anglia's Director of School Service as a member of the Children and Young People's Committee in accordance with statutory requirements. Unfortunately, Dr. Stone can't be here, so assuming that this goes in favour, we will welcome him next time. I'd like to propose the appointment of Dr. Stone. Do I have a seconder? Many, Maria, thank you. All those in favour of this? Unanimous, lovely. So we will welcome Dr. Stone at the next meeting, but congratulate him in his absence. Thank you. Item 3. Item 3 is the minutes of the meeting from the 5th of July and the corresponding action log. We're being asked first to approve the minutes as an accurate record. If any member disagrees, would you like to raise your hand now? Okay. So we'll take that as carried unanimously. In which case an updated action log was also included in the published papers. Are there any questions on the action log or can we take it as noted? Councillor Hoy.
Yeah, just 2 points. Firstly was regarding the Wisbech Free School Secondary School. We haven't had an update on that for a while and just wondered if we might, obviously maybe not right now, but by email perhaps. And it was also regarding, in the minutes, they mentioned the Fenland SEND school and the feasibility study. And I just wondered if that would be on the action log until we actually have the report. Because obviously a report is coming, but surely it should be an open action until it has been here.
Anyone else? Anything on the action log? So we'll note those points. Thank you. Item 4. Item 4 is petitions and public questions. We have no petitions or public questions received for today. So moving quickly on to item 5. Item 5 is the Finance Monitoring Report for August 2020. Martin Wade, Strategic Finance and Business Partner, is joining us to present this report and ably assisted by Fran. Thank you both.
Thank you. So this shows the financial position to the end of August. Not really much change from the position that was previously reported to this committee, with a final outturn for the areas which are in the remit of this committee of £271,000 overspent forecast for the end of the year on the non-DSG elements of the budgets, which can be seen in the table at 1.4 of the covering report. The position on the dedicated schools grant continues to be in the region of about 11.8 million forecast for the end of the year. And we're hoping to have an updated forecast to be presented to the next committee following the half-year point review. The only other element I wanted to draw attention to was in paragraph 2.32 on page 27 of the covering report. As most people will be aware at the moment, obviously, in terms of cost of living, prices are increasing quite significantly. This is having quite an impact on our capital schemes and capital programs within education. And we're seeing schemes increasing in overall cost due to resulting delays in getting final approval, from which the point the quote is given. What we're proposing, and this will go to Strategy and Resources Committee, is to give delegated responsibility to Section 151 officer for a limited 12-month period to be able to authorise a 5% variation on cost changes on schemes at a certain point. This is obviously to try and minimise the impact of the increases in costs as they continue through the programme. So that was really the only thing I wanted to draw attention to. So if there's any points of clarity or questions on the report, open to members.
I guess my first question is the 5% enough to allow for variation in things?
I think based on current assumptions, yes, it would be, but it might be something we need to review, obviously, if costs do continue to increase, as we have seen over the period. At the moment, given that we build in a level of slippage and flexibility in a programme anyway, we feel that should be sufficient at this stage.
Councillor Bradnam, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was drawn to the concerns about the main significant issues at 2.1.2 on page 27. I just wanted to clarify my own understanding of the report, that we're saying at the last paragraph of that section, we're saying that there's an existing DSG deficit of 16.6 million brought forward from the previous year, making a cumulative deficit of 26.4 million to be carried forward into 21-22. Is that right?
Apologies.
Or should that be into 22-23?
Into 22-23, okay. Yes. So we have a cumulative deficit, yeah.
And then based on initial budget requirements for 2022-23, I'm assuming is meant, there's an underlying forecast pressure of 11.2. So do those two get added together? So it would be 37.6?
Yes, so effectively the budgets in terms of deficits get added together, so that cumulative DSG will increase. And I think, as we've reported previously, obviously there are conversations with the DfE at the moment around addressing that going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions and comments, really. Looking at page 37, which is the summary of the committee. Education non-DSG, the budget of 54,729, the actual 5210. So obviously it's a very seasonal, for want of a better word, spend. I'm trying to then tie that up to the detail in 47, 48 and 49, and I cannot make head nor tail of that at all. That would be the first question. The second one is Children's Commissioning 25024 budget. The detail on page 47 is 25269, so there's a difference there of 245. The actual is the same. If I then go to the SEN specialist services, the summary is 102,686 for budget. On page 49, it's 109,111. I'm having great difficulty, and then the actuals are different as well. I'm having great difficulty tying it from the summary to the actuals, because I wanted to dig behind that. And certainly the education on DSG, I wanted to dig behind it, and I've spent a while looking at it. I cannot, and I'm an accountant. Other non-accounting colleagues may struggle even more if they can't tie those back.
Yeah, we can try and do a summary for you outside of the meeting. I think part of the issue is to do with what is classified as dedicated schools grant and what is non-dedicated schools grant and how it's reported in the separate tables. But I will provide a separate reconciliation outside of the meeting for you on that.
I think it's important that for somebody reading the accounts, member of the public, that they can actually stack that back. Otherwise, I'm always believed that, if you can agree the detail back, then you've got confidence in the actual numbers. If I can't agree the detail back, then I lose a bit of confidence in the numbers. Thank you.
Yeah, if you can do us a note on that, Martin, and then obviously this comes to every meeting, so we can clarify it next time if needs be. Thank you. Any further questions, anyone? Councillor Taylor, please. In which case, the report recommendations, the committee is being asked to review and comment on the report, which we have done with that additional bit of work for Martin. Sorry about that. Item 6. Item 6 is the opening update and review of the business planning proposals for 2023 to 2028. This report contains an appendix which is exempt from publication under paragraph 3 of part 1 of the Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, in that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed, information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. The public interest in maintaining the exemption is deemed to outweigh the public interest in publication. Does any member of the committee want to discuss the information contained in this exempt report today, please? Take that as a no, in which case we can discuss this now. Martin, I think you're introducing this one for us as well. Thank you. No, oh, it's Nicola. Sorry, Nicola's introducing this report for us. Thanks, Nicola.
Sorry, it would normally be Charlotte, but I'm just trying to do that on her behalf. So this is the classic budget planning report that comes, I think, this time each year. Members be aware we've started the annual business planning cycle, and the idea will be to agree a business plan and 5-year financial strategy at February full council. Trying to manage the business planning this year has been complicated by the fact that since the business plan for 22 to 27 was agreed, the known revenue gaps at that time have increased due to the international context and a lot of uncertainty around national plans at the moment. There is now a gap of 28.5 million in the coming year and 108 million over the projected 5-year period. This is a challenging situation as we need to set a balanced budget, and so this paper is presented to advise members of the current situation and plans to take this forward. And we'll try between us to take any questions you have. Thank you.
Councillor Maguire, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just take it forward to paragraph 4.94? If Nicola wants to pick that one up. I was curious as the second bullet point, it talks about outdoor centres, cost avoidance for the council stroke income generation. And I was just wondering if you could clarify what that means. And then I'd like to come back, if I may, on a comment on it, Chairman. That makes, or who's going to take it? Sorry.
Hi. So as members will be aware, our outdoor centres are income generating. So as part of the budget business planning phase that we're in now, we're going to do a full review of the current model to ascertain whether there is opportunity for cost reduction in the way that we currently do it, but also future income generation ideas that have perhaps not been tabled to date. So just to give ourselves and yourselves reassurance that that is the best and the most efficient business model that we have.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just come back, the reason I picked it up is because I was going to ask the question is how long ago it is since we last carried out a review. I should declare that not an interest in it, but I used to chair the management committee of the Grafton Water Centre way back in the 90s, which is, I know, before many of you were even born. Notwithstanding that, and I just wonder, and we've always had this issue of income generation, schools use and other uses. And I'm just wondering whether it's whether members are going to see a review of our outdoor centres comprehensively and outdoor, because if we haven't had one for a number of years, I would suggest it's probably appropriate to actually carry out a review to which members are also involved in. So for you, Jen.
I think it's in the planning, isn't it, Rashenda? We might not have a date as such yet. Outdoor centres review. Not yet. Okay, we'll look at that. Thank you. Councillor King, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to get my head around the 4.5.3 and 4.5.4, where it talks about the national living wage. Excuse me if I've missed it somewhere else in the report. I'm not a whiz on finances, but it talks about the increase in national living wage, and it shows what I believe to be figures around inflationary increases as well. But wasn't the national living wage? I'm sure we all in this room support national living wage. I know the Joint Administration is committed to ensuring that's paid. Was that not already factored into the figures anyway, an assumpted increase in national living wage, and where is that shown? Thank you.
So obviously we do put inflation assumptions in there, but obviously the national living wage is linked to CPI. So obviously that's now the current price index is obviously higher than we would previously have anticipated because of obviously all the inflationary pressures that we're seeing nationally. So therefore the additional cost over and above what we'd previously assumed is what's causing the additional pressure. So we always build in an assumption, but obviously at the moment inflation is far and above what we'd previously considered to be in there.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam, please.
My question's been answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, so it was just on that. I was a bit confused as to, because I know the terms kind of changed, but you mentioned about the national living wage, but I'm sure I remember it was actually the administration committed to pay the real living wage rather than the national living wage, because obviously the real living wage is higher, isn't it? I think minimum wage is about £9.50, and I think living wage is nearly £11. So I just wondered why that figure wasn't in there. Is it because it's not being paid, or is it because it's just an oversight? Because obviously the gap's going to be wider if it's real living wage, because it's an extra £1 an hour, which is quite significant with large members of staff. So I don't know if you have an answer to that.
We can take that back and check, absolutely. I imagine if that's been a commitment of the Joint Administration, then it's more of an error in the report, but we'll take that back and confirm back to you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Take these out and hear yourself. I'm on 5.1, Appleberry Weald Secondary and Special. While I understand the reason for the two projects to have this combined approach, will the delivery of Appleberry Weald School 1 year later have an impact on students needing places?
Just to confirm, Councillor Taylor, do you mean the send places, the impact on the send places? Yeah, no, and that's what we're trying to do, is mitigate that as an absolute essential. The send places being delivered at Alconbury are of utmost priority. The secondary places are not needed in quite so much urgency at all. So we are trying to balance the timescales alongside the affordability of being able to deliver the scheme. So Ian sitting behind me, the work that the team are doing is working very, very hard to try and get into contract with the consultants and with the contractors as soon as possible, so that doesn't impact on the send places.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton, please.
Yeah, thanks for the paper. You mentioned twice or more than twice in the paper rising school admissions. Could you just give us a little more information on that, the impact of that, and where the rises are coming across the board?
Certainly, I'm happy to provide a full detailed note to members with the data around that, but we are seeing a significant rise in school admissions, both in terms of phase transfer in this academic year, but also out of year in terms of in-year admissions. We're seeing a large portion of that is in relation to the Ukrainian guests that we're welcoming into Cambridgeshire, but it's not just that. We're seeing migration from other areas of Europe as well, Hong Kong too, and we're seeing that as what that's done is that's essentially taken up the surplus that we would normally keep within certain pockets of the authority, and because the crisis in Ukraine is not something that we could have foreseen and planned for. So there's particular hotspots in terms of pressure. North of Cambridge City is one of them in terms of secondary school places. So the team are having to work really hard with the local schools as well to try and make sure that we can mitigate against the lack of places. But as ever with a large authority and with school place planning, there's also areas where numbers are dropping. So the impact is very much not across the board. We are seeing that in particularly the more urban areas. And then obviously alongside the natural growth that we're seeing anyway, it does very much feel like post-COVID over the summer holidays, lots and lots of movement happened, not only from overseas, but from within the country as well. We're seeing people moving to Cambridgeshire out of London, I think as the cost of living impacts those that live in London as well. So it feels like we've kind of, it's a result of a number of things that's meant that there's a significant rise in admissions. It's always busy this time of year for the admissions team, but this is very different. But I'm happy to provide some more data around the individual wards and districts as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp, please.
Thank you, Chair. 3 questions really, and first one, 4.8.2, the home to school transport. We've got a reduction in costs there, savings. I just wondered, is that, it says we've reviewed demand, is that because demand is decreasing, or is that purely because we're looking at trying to, you know, squeeze the budget, so to speak, or a bit of both?
Right, so that table there at 4.8.2 shows the differences between our previous assumptions. So that's just the change from what we had in the previous business plan. So we're still expecting an increase in demand, especially in the special sector, but that is reduced from our previous assumptions. So we're still seeing an increase overall.
Okay, thank you. That's good. Thanks for the explanation. Then 2 other points. And one is just touching on the point was raised about Alconbury Weald. I understand the reasons for the delay, but with the really high inflation on building materials, is there a risk that budget's going to come under pressure? And then I've got one more question. Yeah.
So we would like to bring back a report to next committee on particularly on Alconbury special school and secondary school to exactly present that options appraisal, as both the place planning teams and the capital teams are working hard to factor in the risks of both waiting and the risks of both moving forward, especially as the numbers coming out, secondary school numbers coming out of the area are perhaps not necessitating a school as quickly as we might need to build it because of the capital costs. So if members are in agreement, we'll bring back a full report to the November committee with some recommendations and seek your views.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. And one final, and it's maybe a naive question, being only on this committee for about a year. The general schools funding, obviously with energy pressures and the increase in starting levels for teachers' pay, and then obviously the increase, does that all come via the grant we get from government? So we've got to hope that we get the amount of money we need from that, or?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So yeah, the dedicated schools grant funds schools directly, and any uplift we get in that needs to fund the pay awards and those inflationary uplifts being faced by schools. Based on the settlement that we've seen, illustrative settlement, I should say, that we've seen from the DFE, at the moment it doesn't take those into consideration. So it'll be interesting to see when we get the final settlement in December whether there is any additional uplift in funding to take those things into account.
Yeah, possibly quite scary news, I think, in December for some of our schools' budgets. Councillor King, please.
Thank you. I think just to add to what Martin was saying, I think as a result of review of the funding formula, we can celebrate that as Cambridgeshire, we've climbed up one place out of the 151 local authorities. I think when we started we were 146 or something, or 141 maybe. We then were 137, and in the next financial year we will be 136. So wow, you know, but every little helps, and we'll see. I wanted to ask Nicola for you, I think, the question around 4.2 and the children's services. So in the same vein as kind of we're looking at everything else, from your current position as of now, do you see the same sort of rise in prices and pressures in school placements, all types, from sort of agency foster carers to children's homes, as we see in construction and elsewhere? And in that sort of context, how confident we can deliver savings we're talking about here without any adverse outcomes for children, of course?
Thank you, Councillor King. I think we start by looking at outcomes for children. So we work back from that just to reassure the committee. We had looked, so each year we look at the placements. I think you're talking generally about the placement budget, which is where we are seeing significant expectations around increases in prices. We spot purchase individual placements, usually for children, and weekly costs are rising very significantly. Some of that is to do with cost of living and inflation. Some of that is to do with the fact that there isn't enough provision in the market. So people are now able to charge really what they think they would like to. We had put inflation demand into requests, increases into the budget. What we're doing with this at the moment is saying that we don't think we will quite need all of the demand and inflation that we've asked for. So we're not actually reducing the budget, we're just not asking for quite as much additional money going into next year. We will need to keep that under review. And Martin and I are looking at that very closely, and we are trying to do a piece of work around projecting how many children in care we think we might have. It has been a very positive, good news story in Cambridgeshire. Our numbers have been coming down very consistently. We have reached a little bit, or had reached a little bit of a plateau, certainly towards the end of the pandemic. And we do now have higher expectations upon us. The government has increased the number of unaccompanied asylum seeking children that each local authority needs to take, not just Cambridgeshire, but it's increased the number for all of us. So that potentially does mean you know, a significant additional number of children that we need to make placements available for. So we do get funding, to be fair, from government for that to support us though. So we think at the moment that it is okay, but we will need to keep it under review. And we're very clear, if children need to come into care, they come into care. You know, that's not a financial decision. We then look at what we can find for the best placement. So we'll continue to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Bullock, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a really worrying report, and the national picture doesn't look very positive at all. Some of it, of course, because of unforeseen events, geopolitical events, but some, as to be honest, some results of political choices as well. I was going to ask about the 4.3, but I think it was already answered around unaccompanied asylum seeking children. I think it's important to make the case that the Home Office does match the funding, especially if they request additional placement and puts more pressure on specific areas within the county. So we'll wait for an update on that one. I wanted to to just highlight point 1.4, I'm sure everyone noticed that is saying that central government has so far given no indication of further funding to councils to meet pressures. And I thought it's important in the context of the committee for the public to know that as well, because often when I meet residents and they see reductions in services or perhaps services that don't necessarily meet their needs or their expectations, they often ask me, what are we paying our council tax for? And perhaps this link to national government funding is not really made, and the fact that with all those external pressures, actually some of the services just cannot meet demand in the way that residents expect. And it's so important for us as a council to make the case for fairer funding from national government as well. I also think it's important to put it in the wider context of similar councils experiencing similar increases in the budget gaps. I wanted to mention our neighbors in Peterborough. I was reading a strategy report from their council saying that we're entering, and I quote from the report, a new era of permanent austerity. So I guess I'll end on this rhetorical question: is this new era of permanent austerity the new normal that we're experiencing now, or is it a better case we can make as a council alongside our neighbors, statistical neighbors and councils in general, to make a stronger case for fairer funding? Because this is not a situation that's exceptional in our area or our neighboring area. It affects the whole country. And I think it's quite unfair for our residents, because we witness, of course, this impact of geopolitical events, but we do witness some mismanagement of the national economy. I'm really glad that the impact of Brexit is finally acknowledged and its impact on the construction sector and other sectors as well in this report. So I guess I'll just end with this comment. I think we do need collectively to make a stronger case that with the population growth in Cambridge and with all the other events happening outside of our control, that we do need a fairer deal for our area in general from central government. Thank you.
I don't think we'd disagree with your comments. Thank you. Councillor Ambrose Smith, please.
Thank you, Chair. Don't know who this question is reported at. 4.6.3. You're looking to make £800,000 worth of savings have been identified. And I see here it's for the managed increase in residential children's placement demand. We're looking to save £750,000. So we've identified that there is a demand, but we're now cutting the funding to that requirement. Could somebody explain to me 4.63, please?
So I think that's probably, so I think that's me again. So I think that was what Councillor King was referring to a minute ago in terms of are we managing the placement demand appropriately? So we have a calculation around what we think demand's going to be. We also have a calculation around what we think inflation is going to be, which Paul Martin and his other finance colleagues are having to continually adjust at the moment, because obviously that does keep changing. It is a predicted demand, however, so we put a predicted demand in. We have reviewed that in light of our current situation, and what we think at the moment is that we can reduce how much additional demand we'd asked for in the budget by that amount, but we will need to keep that under review really carefully. And obviously, if children are coming into the system and need a placement, we will need to fund that placement. Does that answer the question?
Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, sort of on a similar point regarding that. Also, the point below, you're talking about potentially reducing staffing levels regarding business support. Obviously, later on when we've got the corporate parenting report, case levels haven't gone down much really, and we're talking about demand, but there's also not only unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, but Cambridgeshire, I think, are taking over 500 asylum-seeking families that aren't unaccompanied next year, and obviously we don't know what impact that's going to have, because the families might need to access services, they might not. We don't, say it is a kind of a little bit of finger in the air stuff, but I'm just a little bit unsure as to how we can say that we know all these things are coming down the road, but then we're at the same time saying we don't think we're going to have the demand, and we're going to be able to make nearly £1 million worth of savings. I just don't necessarily think they're realistic, to be honest.
So thank you, Councillor Hoy. I think these are difficult times, and I think it's very difficult to make some of the predictions, and we can only do our our best with some of it and work it through. And I think in an ideal world, we would want to be perhaps looking at some of this data towards the end of the year. Unfortunately, the business planning cycle means that we do have to be looking at it a little bit earlier in order to give councillors time to consider things and make decisions. In terms of the families coming next year, what we would very much hope is that we would be able to support them with our early help services and our targeted support services and our universal services. This is very specifically demand around our placement budget. So this is we're only talking about the budget that is available to support children when they come into care. So it doesn't impact on any of the other budgets that we'll be looking to try and support children in the community. There is a possibility that we can reduce some of our teams more generally because we have been so successful with the family safeguarding model. So we actually have a really good news story there in terms of caseloads. I think the issue around business support is a very legitimate one, and we do need to look to make sure that our administrative colleagues are supporting people and the wider effort, not just social workers, but the wider effort as far as possible. We do also have to think about the fact that we do have a very significant budget gap, and we are going to have to think about how we're going to fill that and meet that. And as officers, we need to give you options, and then obviously ultimately you will make decisions about what you think is the best way to move forward.
Thank you. I think that was everybody, unless I've missed anyone. We've been asked with this report to note the overview and context for the 2023-2028 business plan, to note the initial estimates made for demand, inflationary and other pressures, and to note and overview the estimates made for the updated capital programme, which is obviously the excluded item that nobody wanted to discuss. So we have done that. Thank you all. Item 7. Item 7 is the catchily named Early Years Pseudo-Dynamic Purchasing System Report. Penny Bates, Area Education Officer, is joining us to introduce this report. Thank you, Penny. Then after this, we will hear from Councillors Thompson and Councillor Cox-Condren, who've given notice of wishing to speak on this item as local members. Thanks, Penny.
Thank you. Thanks very much. In November 2021, a paper was presented to CYP seeking approval to establish a framework for early years and childcare providers. We have now established a pseudo-dynamic purchasing system. It's an online procurement tool to streamline the procurement process. It's very similar to a framework, but it does allow us to open annually for applications without those already on the PDPS having to reapply. Therefore, it allows us to grow the list of providers on our PDPS. It's slightly different to a DPS because it's permanently, a DPS is permanently open, and it only has pass-fail questions, whereas we've introduced a quality element because it's childcare. So a DPS would not be suitable for what we're looking for. Applications opened on the 17th of July and closed on the 20th of September, and we have had 21 completed applications received. There's a document at Appendix 3, which is called the Approval to Award Report, which we require approval for in order to accept those successful applications onto the PDPS. And we're looking for delegated authority for John Lewis to be able to approve that. Following this, we'd like to call off the PDPS to identify childcare providers for Arbury, a childcare setting in Arbury, a setting in Oakington, and 2 childcare settings in St Neots. The potential value of each of those contracts is over £500,000. So we're seeking approval to award those contracts following the call off if we have suitable childcare providers come forward. However, this is not a cost to the council's core budget because this is funding which is made as part of the earlier single funding formula from the earliest block of the dedicated schools grant. We plan to open the PDPS annually, and then we will return to CYP with a list of planned call-offs for the year ahead. And we are seeking delegated authority also to call off should this be required at short notice if we have a childcare provider who is likely to close, so that we can ensure that there's no break in provision for families and children. Obviously, any decisions, any delegated decisions would be made in consultation with spokes and chair and vice chair of CYP.
Thank you, Penny. We'll now hear from Councillor Thompson, who's asked to speak as local member for Longstanton, Northstowe and Over. As the rules go, you have up to 5 minutes to share your views with the committee. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Penny. I just want to raise the situation in Oakington has been slightly different than I think is happening across the county. Oakington has recently made approximately 10 staff redundancies, and the low intake of pupils this year has been below 10. So I appreciate as a local authority we provide statutory services, and I think my problem and my issue is that I want us to be as transparent as possible to these early providers who will be investing in our children's future, where we might not have the demographics locally. I don't know what the prediction from Cambridge Insights is for Oakington, but it is a quite a older generation in Oakington. There is currently some new homes have just finished, very small amount, and in the local plan there's only 20 more houses. There is a retirement home that's been put forward by local residents. So I kind of feel like I'm not sure if we have the demographics, and I'm sure we will do that research. And it's good to read that the local early providers will do their own research so they can find those kind of things. But I'm hoping us as a county that we'll be very transparent about those things, because we would hate to think that we take on a failing business for them. Well, they'll be taking on the business, but it might not be as lucrative as they might think. So I suppose what I'm really asking, and I know I've had these conversations with you guys, is how transparent can we be to ensure that the early providers are aware of the demographics happening locally in Oakington. Thank you.
Thank you. I completely agree with you that we do need to be transparent. We had a lot, and I know you're aware of some of this, we had a lot of interest in the venue in Oakington, which we are looking to do a call off on. And so we decided to include it in this paper because of the level of interest. But I absolutely agree, we need to share the demographics and the birth rate figures so that any provider has those and is fully aware of the forecasts in the coming years. They will also need, as you said, to do their own research, and they'll need to be confident that they have a viable business and sustainable childcare setting, because that's what we're looking for, and security for those families that use it. But I completely agree, we need to be transparent and share that information with all providers.
So so the 21 interests that you've had currently, they're a broad range, aren't they? They're from like childcare right up to bigger businesses. So
they are. We've had interest from all sorts of providers, from childcare, from childminders right the way up to full daycare providers, and we're just finalising those at the moment to identify who's been successful and who hasn't this time.
So if they do their own research and they find that it's not viable locally, what does that mean to us as a local authority?
I think with Oakington, it's always been borderline. We have a childcare setting just on the edge. It's not a preschool, it's a full daycare setting, and it's accessed by parents from further afield. So the need for childcare has been borderline, and which is why we put out, we requested an expression of interest from providers who would be interested in running childcare from that setting, and the response was very, very high, which is why we thought actually we will put a call out and we will see if somebody does believe that they could run a viable business and they could make it work. If we're not successful, I think we'll have to review and decide where we go from there, whether we feel that given the demographics at the moment, there is sufficient childcare, and maybe we revisit it in 12 months' time. But I think we'll have to review when we know what that response is.
Thank you. I'm supposed to ask at this point, does anyone have any question of clarification to Councillor Thompson at this point? Nope. In which case, Councillor Cox-Condren has also asked to share her views as a local member for Arbury. Unfortunately, she's not able to join us in person, but she has submitted written comments which have been circulated to committee members for information. These will now be read out by the Democratic Services Officer for the benefit of those watching the meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Cox-Condren writes, I'm very pleased to see this recommendation coming to the committee today. It was a great blow to Arbury parents to suddenly hear so very last minute that Arbury preschool wasn't reopening this term. There are high levels of deprivation in Arbury ward. Many residents already feel forgotten, and the current cost of living crisis means that families are already experiencing poverty, high stress, and all that entails. The parents and carers of children registered at Arbury Preschool have struggled with the logistics of changing childcare arrangements at such short notice. And those with younger children who are anticipating using the preschool in the future have also suffered this, feeling uncertainty and stress when there is more than enough uncertainty and stress for many families already. So I would like to voice my strong support for this recommendation on behalf of these families, in particular in relation to approving the call-off and progressing award to a new contract as soon as possible so that a childcare provider can be in place at Arbury Preschool for the new term starting in January. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashenda. So I'll now open the whole report to questions and debate. Councillor Bradnam, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm pleased and sad to hear the report from Councillor Cox-Condren because Arbury's not very far from me, and I felt sure it, although I don't know it as well as Councillor Cox-Condren, I felt sure it would not suffer from the same situation as Oakington, and I'm sure there is a great deal of need there. So I'm very glad to see that this is part of the framework to try and resupply that provision there, because I'm sure it's sorely needed, and I'm heartily in support of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I truly support this. It totally makes sense. As I was reading the report, I did think to myself, how are we going to monitor, how are we going to monitor them actually within this kind of framework, and I was glad to see that at 1.7 that there is provisions there to monitor, for example, the provider's Ofsted rating, if that was to change within it. So I'm really glad to see that there as well. Thank you for the report and the work.
Thank you. Councillor King, please.
Thank you, Penny. Just to clarify, the timeline we have on page 103, that's the timeline for appointing the providers onto the framework, right? Rather than,
yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. What then, if we, for example, think about Arbury Preschool, what will be the timeline once we close the framework and we have the providers there for each call-off to happen and for the new provider to start in Arbury, for example?
Well, we have prepared all the paperwork in advance, so we have the paperwork ready to go to carry out a call-off for Arbury, and that would be the first on our list of call-offs. So once we have finalised those providers, which should just be a few days, and we've informed them, that we've then got a standstill period, which I believe is until the 22nd, and following the standstill period, we could do the first call-off.
And then how long will it give them to respond and so on?
We can be relatively flexible with time. If we gave them 2 or 3 weeks in order to respond, obviously we then have to assess the applications, which would be another few weeks. We would hopefully then identify somebody shortly after. It very much depends on the number of applications we have and the time it takes to assess them, but I would have thought mid-November, maybe early November.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton, please.
Yeah, thank you. At 5.3, you mentioned that the report comes in response to various short notice closures, and there was one very short notice closure in my division. And that was mainly because of staff, well, it was wholly because of staff shortage, which of course we know is a big problem across the county. So how are you going to deal with that? Because that will affect even the people who are coming through through the PDPS. Have you got guarantees from those people who've responded to the call?
You're right, it's a very big problem in the sector at the moment. We have asked questions within the PDPS about how they will support staff and retain staff, and how they will encourage staff. There is also some work taking place at the moment, I believe, within the early years team to support staff in. So we hope that the providers we're looking at will have provided us with some reassurance about their recruitment and retention of staff. But I guess it's not something we can ever be certain of. And as I say, the work is taking place at the moment to try and support that. But it's challenging, I think it's fair to say, and I don't think there are any easy answers.
Councillor Sharp, please.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of points, really. I'm not against the paper, although I'm not a great lover of delegating contract decisions of over $500,000 rather than going through committee, but I understand the feed. So from that point of view, and this would be a general point probably that I would think should happen in all committees, whether we had an item on the agenda meeting following decisions such as this, just for noting, so members are at least aware of what contracts have been agreed. And the second point, it's more a question for Penny. You touched on that the funding for this comes from the dedicated schools grant. So have we already got a forecast in the numbers to spend this, or is this going to be, and obviously we don't know exactly what the amount's going to be, I understand that. I'm just thinking, is this going to be an additional pressure, or have we accounted for a rough amount, a rough approximation of what we think it's going to be?
I'm going to check with Martin, actually, because he is the expert on this.
Yeah, so because effectively these pupils would be pupils we'd already be funding somewhere else effectively during as part of the early years block funding. So it wouldn't be an additional cost as such. It's already factored into our overall allocation. And because early years funding is actually given to us based on actual take up on a termly basis, the funding actually flexes throughout the year depending on the actual number of hours young people are accessing.
Okay, thank you for that, Martin. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson, please.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to say what I didn't say before is I totally support the paper, and thank you very much, Penny, for all your work.
Thank you. Have I missed anyone? No. So if we move to the report recommendations, co-opted members of the committee are eligible to vote on this report. The committee is being asked to, deep breath, delegate authority to award to the Director of Education in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Children and Young People Committee when deciding which providers meet the criteria to join the pseudo-dynamic purchasing system. B, delegate authority to the Director of Education in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of Children and Young People Committee to approve that the call-offs be made from the pseudo-dynamic purchasing system when an opportunity arises at short notice, and currently including but not limited to Albury Preschool, the Roundhouse Primary Academy in Loves Farm St Neots, the Community Centre Kestaway Loves Farm St Neots, and the mobile located on Oakenbury Primary School. And C, to delegate authority to the Director of Education in consultation with Chair and Vice Chair of Children and Young People Committee to award contracts when a call-off from the PDPS has been made and the most suitable provider has been identified. Can I take that as being approved unanimously, or would we like to vote on this item?
Agreed.
That'll be a no, I can't say again. I'll take that as unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Penny. Thank you. Item 8 relates to the recommissioning of the Healthy Schools Service. Val Thomas, Deputy Director of Public Health, is going to introduce this to us. Welcome, Val.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Sorry. The first point I'd like to ask the committee about is a change to one of the recommendations. It's the first recommendation which asks for an extension of the current contract that we have for Healthy Schools, extended from March 23 to March 24. The request for the change is that it is to March 25, and I will explain the rationale for that as I go through the paper. So in essence, this paper is asking for a recommendation to extend the current contract for Healthy Schools until March 25. And this is alongside support for a review of the Healthy Schools service and also other schools related services, most notably the 5 to 19 Healthy Child Programme. And the outcomes of the review, of course, will be reported back to the committee. In summary, the Healthy Schools service has been running now for about 5 years, and it was set up to provide a mixture of direct services to school. So in terms of training for some nutritional interventions and websites, but also, and perhaps more importantly, to provide some coordination to the myriad of services that work in schools. And to avoid duplication and to make sure they're more complementary. The initial results after 5 years have been very positive. So normally we would be coming along and asking committee to support another recommission of the service. However, alongside this, the section 75 for the Healthy Child Programme is scheduled to end in March 24, I'm sorry. And that programme also wants to review its services, and initially it was thought that they could do it within the time frame. So when this paper was written, it seemed fine, but when considering all the factors that need to be taken into account into this review, and if you're looking at other services as well, it was felt that they would also need to bring a paper here, which I presume will be very shortly, to extend that section 75 until 25. So hence my request for the change in this paper that we're asking for 1 year and 7 month extension to the current contract. And so I think that is, in summary, is asking the committee to support the extension of this contract because it will facilitate a review of all the resources that are going into schools at the moment. And I think it's a little bit about the context, which I think the committee is probably very much aware. COVID has presented a lot of challenges to schools and to children and young people. And it's perhaps very timely to look at what is currently being supported, how could we do it in a more, perhaps use our resources more effectively, and where the gaps are, which is very much the rationale for these extensions.
Thank you. Councillor Bradman, please.
Thank you. Looking at you, Ross, another chair. Thank you for the report. And I understand your request to extend to 2025, not just 2024. So I appreciate, I was going to ask the question, do we have evidence of the effectiveness of this service? And I appreciate that at this time, it's probable that it might be easier to evidence the need, you know, the clear need is so huge that probably evidencing the good this funding has previously done might be harder to evidence because it's going on all the time and it's so vitally necessary. But what I wondered is, do we have data that shows that this service is effective and it's good value for money?
Yes. Are there more questions now, or do you like to do it? Right. Okay, fine. Yes. We do, and we can certainly send you some of our routine reports that we have for them. But obviously, the objective of the review is to look at that and play it into the wider picture. So we can send you what we obviously got to collect and monitor, and some of the initial evaluations, some of the parts, the constituent parts
of the service as well. Like can I send that through Democratic Services or?
And that was the report that was going to come later on in the autumn, wasn't it?
That's the Healthy Child Programme.
Okay.
The Healthy Schools Programme is commissioned separately, but we obviously we monitor that and evaluate it as well as we go along. And if we were asking for a recommission, we would have included that information, but this is more for an extension, so we can drill down more into that data and look at how it fits with data that's emerging from the 5 to 19 Healthy Child Programme as well. And other programs, there are a lot of mental health services, for example, that feed into schools.
I'd certainly welcome seeing that kind of report. Thank you very much, Val.
Thank you. Councillor Slatter, please.
Thank you, through your chair. Yes, I welcome the idea of a review, and it will take a while. We on this agenda, we have 3 items that just are so interconnected. This 8, 9 and 12, I think it is. And that's why I've got to print them out and write my notes on bits of paper. No, seriously though, we have in the adults and health, we have the report about mental health for young people, which is a major concern for all of us. And part of that is the long waiting times, and a week is a long time in such circumstances, as we know only too well. So I asked myself, what would I do if I was a young person looking for help? And what would I do if I was that young person's parent or grandparent? And I find that it's very difficult to know where the authoritative advice can come from, let alone the actual practical help that's within reach. I asked, for example, Everyone Health, what sort of organisation is that? I've looked at the website and that doesn't tell me, is it a bit of the county council? Is it a charity? Is it a not-for-profit business? It really doesn't tell us. And hasn't got a county council logo on it. So if I was a parent, I would think, well, that's a bit dodgy, I'll look somewhere else. And yet we are putting a lot of public money into that. So I think that does need to be made clear. And the website similarly does need to be and there are the websites that are signposted are of key importance. And I know it's very difficult and time consuming to monitor them, but I think it is most important. Rather than repeating myself with subsequent items, I would ask that the part of what we look for when we're commissioning is a recognition of this in the potential providers and some sort of interactive nature to a website. So if, for example, there are alarms to raise, how would I raise an alarm about a particular service that has been signposted? And I obviously would feel very responsible for anything that is done essentially with county council money, but not necessarily obviously in the name of the county council. So I think this needs to be looked at all the time, because we know there are fake sites. There is fake advice, and this is where we might be guilty of not so much putting young people in harm's way as failing to put them in the way of the right sort of advice. That was my main point. I think leave it at that and then see, because you probably already thought this, but I thought on behalf of the public who might be watching, I'd raise it verbally. Thank you.
Service. Oh, can you hear me? I think it's a responsibility for your commissioning services that you quality assured. And what part of that quality assurance is that any of the information that is provided on there is evidence-based, and any service that they recommend also meets that same standard of evidence-based as well. And it's something which I think we try to embed in our service specs. If we fail sometimes, I apologise, but that certainly is the ambition, is always to quality assure everything, the information that's provided and where people are signposted to, because I think the fallout is potentially not great if it goes along.
In which case, and this is something I could have said about one of your other reports, 4.6, I welcome. It may be almost routine, and you may not even have, it might have been an algorithm that wrote it, but working with local members to champion and promote the service at a local level and to identify any barriers to access and uptake. We, as members, all of us, need to be aware of what our local area can offer. Often we discover it far too late. And as you were saying earlier, we can then also identify the gaps. So we can help. We are still on healthy schools, aren't we? Yes. And the other thing I did want to ask was, do we have an idea, and it's part of what Councillor Bradman was saying in terms of value for money, are we reaching every school? Is that in any report? We sometimes say how many educational places are we reaching, out of how many, where are the gaps again? And is it a matter of just a friendly note, to the local head teacher? I know we haven't got an LEA anymore, but we do have that universal responsibility. So we do need to know, whether the school-based is so key. It's not actually in the school building, I realise. They don't necessarily want to get their help there. I appreciate that, but the actual school community. Thank you.
Sometimes I breathe and I seem to turn it off, but there you go. I'm sorry about that. Yes, I think that the report will provide some information about the numbers of schools, particularly schools that are having direct services where they're having a nutrition program going. And we base that on what the National Child Measurement Program is telling us, for example, about obesity in the levels. But in terms of that universal offer, that we use various means to promote the service through John's newsletter that goes out from here, for example. If there's anything new coming up in the schools, we use that as well. And we promote the website itself. So we do like to see it as a universal service. Certainly the things that we can do within the resource packet that can be universal in terms of information and so forth, and also access to training, because a lot of training now can be done online. But there are more there's more on-site training, for instance, around nutrition and so forth, that that tends to be based on what we understand about needs in an area, and that's from the National Child Measurement Programme.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I just want to check with Val, if you were asking us to change the initial recommendation to from 2024 to 2025. But if I read paragraph 1.2, if you look at that, you've already taken advantage of 2 12-month periods, extensions, which takes us to 2023, because the original contract ended in 21. Therefore, taking it from 24 to 25 is 2 years. Now, you say we're allowed under a short-term extension under the regulations. But I got the impression further down that you would actually complete this review by 24. So I'm getting confused by the dates that you're.
Yeah,
because it's a 2 year, another 2 years extension. And if that, so one question, is that allowed under the short term? And why is it going past 24 into 25?
I should have had it, and I have discussed it with the head of procurement and commercial. And because of the circumstances, she said, is it acceptable? But it shouldn't be up to 25, but it shouldn't go beyond that. The reason why it was initially put to 24, because that would align the end point of it with what is the end of the section 75 of the Healthy Child Programme. But now the Healthy Child Programme will be coming here to ask for an extension from 24 to 25, because they feel to do a proper review, it will take longer. So this has happened from the process of writing the paper until today. So that's why we've been asked for an extension. And I think it's 3 years plus one, but it was a 5-year contract with the option to have a break after the 3rd year and the 4th year.
Thanks, Chairman. On that basis, if that is within the regulations, then of course, obviously, I'm happy personally to support the change in the recommendation. I'll take one's word for that at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mac. Councillor King, please.
Yeah, I think we're all thinking about the same kind of questions here, and procurement seems to be a theme. But what I wanted to ask, and thank you, Val, for all your work and patience with us and understanding all this. if we just look at the broad picture, the odds are we will end up with the same provider between 2018, right, and 25. That's an awful long time. Do we know, so it's Everyone Health at the moment, do we know others in the market? Do we kind of test the market and make sure, is there a mechanism to make sure that we are still getting value for money from Everyone's Health? Because you would imagine they get quite comfortable with such a long kind of period of time ahead of them.
I put it further away, perhaps I won't want it to go off, be so sensitive. We'd always test the market at the start of any procurement. So that's an intrinsic part of it. I will say there aren't too many services like this to compare it, but there are a lot of services that are specifically school-based in the way this has been configured. But there are, I agree with you, there are a lot of services that provide the type of behaviour change support which the service promotes and endorses. And we do understand a fair amount about that market. How many of them are specialists to work in schools? I think there are fewer. In terms of a 7-year contract for this type of work, the amount of work it has taken to secure the type of partnership working, to build the trust with schools, it's not something that's easily achieved in a shorter term contract. And it goes back to a point about quality as well. I think schools, they don't trust anyone, and I think we've had to build, the services have to build the trust with schools. And so I think an ordinary service which was going in and providing some of these services, perhaps out in the community, it would be easier. But schools are quite demanding in some ways, and I think justifiably so, on what they offer. So I think the length in a programme like this has to be seen in the context. It takes time to develop and grow.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton, please.
Thanks. I'm looking at paragraph 2.8, and I just wanted some reassurance that the voices of young people are heard. You said that there's a wide set of key performance indicators, and I'm hoping that includes the voice of young people. I was just interested, you mentioned as an example county initiatives on gambling or the Junior Travel Ambassador Programme. If you could just say a little more about that. So 2 questions there, thanks.
Keeps doing this. The gambling is more around information, because there's increasing amount of data of how gambling has gained traction amongst all ages. So I think that's more about, and it's something we are, to be perfectly frank, I don't think we focused on very much, but we are seeing it as an emerging trend. So it's something to be looked at, and something we do every year is the not every 2 years, I'm sorry, the health related behaviour survey, which is done with all years 8 and 10 secondary schools. And that we've started to introduce questions about that as well. And that report we're expecting it in November, because it was done in the last academic year, which would hope that would give us some more information of how to, for want of a word, pitch the gambling intervention. The Junior Ambassador, it's having young people who act as ambassadors or champions for active travel, essentially. Yeah, I think that was a very good idea, actually. I'll make that suggestion.
Yeah, I was assuming this might be school trips, but no, active travel. Thank you. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
To reassure me on the other point about young people's voices being
I think absolutely essential. I don't think you can do anything without talking to young people, because you're quite likely to be totally ignored when you try and introduce something where they haven't had the chance to comment on it. So I think, again, like co-production is now become very much an essential part of all commissioning, but I think there's a longer history of it with young people in particular, because we know that unless you involve young people, in my experience anyway, is that you're actually pushing uphill when you're trying to introduce something afterwards.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp, next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not against the principle of this, although I've got two issues. One is when a contractor takes a contract, they obviously would build into that contract their setup costs, etc. So I would have expected the contractor to have built that into the 3 years with the initial contract. So they may have savings of costs. Balanced against that, obviously the inflation we're suffering at the moment would probably negate that. But I just wondered what if any, I mean, it's not a good, in the scheme of things, the actual contract value is not a great deal of money relatively to what we deal with normally. So it's not a big issue, but you know, I'm not a great lover of rolling stuff on like this, which for 4 years, but I understand where you're coming from in terms of the review.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there will be additional costs. Their costs will increase, and I think part of the whatever route we go down after the review, part of that will, I think, will in terms of market testing to see what is possible. But the overhead costs in this are not huge in a sense, because so much of it is virtual teaching information, evidence-based policies. There is some cost around some of the hands-on work around nutrition, but otherwise the costs are not high in the sense that they could be in other services, because it's not so much, it's not, for instance, like a health visiting service, which is very much hands-on.
Thank you. I think I've got Councillor Bradnam next.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify that the Junior Travel Ambassadors Programme, as I understood it, was an initiative that was certainly supported and encouraged by Councillor van der Ven, and it related to children using public transport such as trains to get to school. And it was supporting them with initiatives to encourage them to use trains safely. So that was my understanding.
I think we try to build active travel into anything. So if they can walk to school, even better. And if you catch a train, it avoids traffic pollution and so forth. So I think we always, there's the environmental side of it, but there's also that active travel side to it as well. Yes, that's true. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, please.
So I was going to pick up on 2.8 as well, just to say the Junior Travel Ambassadors is an absolutely brilliant programme put in place by STARS. And I actually got interviewed by the Junior Travel Ambassadors this year at Hatton Park School, who have reached platinum status, the first one in the county. And it was brilliant to be interviewed by Year 6 and how they influence your younger children to walk, scoot, bike to school. I also think there's other key performance indicators could be what else the school does, which is bikeability, which is another thing that county provides. There's also active travel with highways, how the routes to and from school, which is really important. There's also the HAF that we provide as well, because they have the activities during school holidays that keep kids active. And I just think all those, if you put all of those together, it really would be helpful for a key performance indicator, actually. So, yeah, thank you.
It's something that we are promoting, certainly all aspects of active travel and how it can be drawn together.
Thank you. Councillor King, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the review, obviously this contract coming to an end wasn't a surprise, so you'd expect the review to have been completed or built into your programme of work initially. But despite two long extensions, you've not been able to achieve the review. Do you have the resources that you need to get the job done? And if not, what do you need? Because I'd hate to be back here again talking about another review, which is obviously going to add to costs.
We do have the resources. I think part of the delay why it wasn't undertaken was because of COVID, which was another reason. It really interrupted the sort of energy of the program. I think going back to a question about 7 years, effectively, COVID certainly interrupted what we would have normally have done with all our programs, particularly as this was a relatively new one. It'd be really important that we we evaluated it. We do evaluate, but there was that delay, and I think from certainly since the spring, we've been looking at what we need to do and catch up. So it's as simple as that. Normally it would have been done in a, say, midway through the 4th year of the contract, or even earlier.
Thank you. I think that was everyone who's indicated they wanted to speak on this. If I start by reminding you that the officer recommendation has been revised to extending the contract, the existing contract for an additional year, so that it now reads to extend the current contract with Everyone Health, the current Healthy Schools provider, until 31st of March 2025, to allow for the review and re-procurement as detailed in this paper. The short-term extension is permitted under the Public Contract Regulations 2015 Regulation 72. And then the remaining recommendations remain unchanged and are to review the Healthy School Service alongside school nursing and other school-related services to identify a school-based service model which will contribute to the improvements in health outcomes for children and young people. And C, that the outcomes of the review are all reported back to this committee along with the recommended commissioning approach. Co-opted members are eligible to vote on this, so all those in favour of those recommendations, please. Thank you. I think that's unanimous, Rishenda. Thank you very much. Thank you, Val. Item 9. Item 9 relates to the commissioning child weight management services, and the Deputy Director of Public Health, Val, stays with us to introduce this one as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This paper is asking the committee to support the procurement of a child weight management services, and the recommendations as detailed there are for a competitive procurement for essentially 5 years with 2 breakpoints. And just to clarify that we do a lot of joint commissioning with Peterborough City Council. As yet, they are going through their business planning process, so they have not yet confirmed funding for child weight management services, and hence cannot confirm whether they would be able to enter into a joint procurement with us. So to clarify, number B is it's for the approval is for Peterborough City Council to join in a procurement, not for them to give approval for county to go out to procure. And the same thing applies to the lead commissioner as well, in terms of CCC being the lead commissioner for this service. And then finally, to authorise the Director of Public Health in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Children and Young People Committee to award the contract up to 2.2 million and compliance with all legal processes, and the Pathfinder Legal to take forward the documentation and legal side of it. In summary, I think that I don't think anybody can avoid the public health issue of obesity. And in children now by year 6, we have around 30% of children being either overweight or obese. The data that came out during COVID, which wasn't as full data as we would have normally, because for obvious reasons, the measuring couldn't be undertaken in schools, and that indicated a horrific increase of 4%. We think that the measuring that was done in the last academic year will not be as high as that, because it will be a more representative sample, but we are expecting we're expecting, based on information from the centre that receives all the data, that there will be an increase which will be higher, but is at a higher rate than we were before COVID. In fact, the highest. We'll get confirmation of that shortly. The data usually comes out end of October, beginning of November. So I think that is very much the rationale, but that's not to say we haven't been doing anything about childhood obesity. There are a number of programs that we commission already, but those are very much population based. So it's universal. We have in the past commissioned weight management services in the same way you commission adult weight management services, but they have been very challenging in terms of recruitment of families, really challenging. But we also know that there are some children and families that really do need support. Families that don't, that just find it very a challenging issue, but also when you look at children perhaps in SEND services that we know have particular challenges around overweight and obesity. So the model that we're proposing is somewhat encompassing and having various tiers. We already have what we call a tier 1 population level, where we are doing a lot of community programs. We do programs based in schools, so we've increased the number of the daily mile, actually changed it a little bit, so it's daily activity, so children can actually choose the activity. But we know that there is this need, but particular need that some families need extra support. So through a central triage service, which will accept referrals from families, from professionals, children can be referred into a central triage. If it's something that perhaps, you know, parents are just worried about their children, want them to be more active, then we will put them through the tier 1, give them information, point them in a direction of local services which could offer them support. The tier 2 service is something that's more akin to the adult weight management services, where it would be a group sessions, where which would bring in the whole family, and would involve diet, physical activity. This is, we think, will probably be the most challenging. The members of my team I have 2 public health nutritionists who have both worked in this field in childhood weight management, and they are developing their thinking around that based on evidence, but also on their own experience. And then thirdly, we would want, we know that there are some children, I think I mentioned children in SEND services that have particular challenges. So that would be more of a bespoke response and more of a one-to-one with families. So the model essentially maintains and grows the population-wide service, but then offers more of a bespoke service for families and children that have particular challenges.
Thank you. I've got a lot of people to speak, so I'll start. Are you anticipating obesity in children increasing with the current cost of living crisis and the delay or cancellation of things like the buy one, get one free type offers on chocolate and things? Yeah.
Presenting this in the context of a cost of living crisis, I think does present particular challenges. We're already seeing its impacts on reports that we are getting from various professionals working in the field from different services. And I think how we shape this service in response to that is going to be particularly challenging. And I think certainly the sort of experts in nutrition in my field, they have lots of ideas and things around alternative options for cooking and so forth. But at the end of the day, people, I think some of the pressures that some people are confronting make all of that very challenging as well. So it's going to have to be carefully honed in terms of the way it is presented and promoted, because I think if you present a service that does in no way seem realistic to people who are experiencing real hardship, it will just disengage people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'll start with Councillor King, please.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing it to us. Well, hugely important paper. And what I wanted to just explore a little bit is the fact that we are dependent currently on Peterborough County Council to support that equally. If they are unable to support that, what would be the plan B? Would you bring us the proposal to do it for Cambridgeshire alone or not?
It's not dependent on PCC in any way at all. You would, their contribution would be for the service to be delivered in the Peterborough area. So it wouldn't make any difference. So I think in the recommendation, the funding is up to a certain level. So I think that we would certainly commission it just for Cambridgeshire, because I think we do have the funding in Cambridgeshire, and subject to approval, we could proceed with it anyway. I suppose the joint commission is something that we've been doing across all our services. The majority of public health services are commissioned jointly with Peterborough at the moment. Okay. And there are the potential for savings on management costs and so forth.
It is just, I guess, subject to approval by Peterborough County Council. That's sort of,
it's the wording, yes.
It's wording which might not be 100% accurate in a sense, but fine.
Could we
let's-
change the wording a bit in that and make a note of the?
I mean, only if there is a material risk that Peterborough would say no. If that's more of a formality and we expect them to support that, then that's all fine.
I think they would have, they'd certainly supported in principle. It's just they're finalising their business planning. I don't think there's any opposition to us doing it jointly or as lead commissioner. The issue is that they haven't finalised their business planning.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam, please.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, table one, thank you very much for such a comprehensive report. And table one gives us a kind of snapshot of the situation up until 2018-19, but it shows that inevitability of an increase in size and an increase in obesity as time goes on. You know, the fact that at year 6, we've got nearly 40% of our young people overweight or obese. That's a real worry. And so what I'm aware of, and others have raised this in your earlier, and you've responded to it in your early response, but this is going to be extremely complicated to get right, isn't it, in this very challenging situation? And I wonder whether you are envisaging that group sessions, which actually might support parents more, are more likely to work. And will you be linking and pointing people towards, you know, I know some of the problems, reiterate, some of the problem is to do with people not being able to afford fuel and not being able to afford to cook effectively and efficiently and at low cost. And for some people, that will mean that they're going to be relying on takeaways, and you know, somehow we need to change that round. Is there anything we can do to provide help that will direct them towards healthier options for cooking? Sorry, I know that's a huge question. You know, it opens up a huge can of worms. I sort of have a vision of the wonderful provision for food that's often provided in Gurdwaras and such like. And I just wonder, can we do something like that? Provide cooking facilities for families to come and cook in bulk and then take away, something like that?
I think there's a lot of work being undertaken at the moment along with the sort of maximising income and in view of the cost of living crisis. I wouldn't say that that was within the scope or vision of this, but certainly it involves cooking, advice on buying and so forth. I think if we were to organise cooking facilities, then I think we'd have to be looking more widely, I think, because there are wider implications. And I just think of all the regulations around, we have to be extremely careful about, this is my own experience of trying to set these things up in the past in terms of actually setting in terms of the regulations, health and safety. But I think it's something to be looked at in a bigger scale as part of the response to the cost of living crisis, which I think organisations across the county are undertaking at the moment. But certainly in terms of advising on how to cook with very little money, or how to eat, I think probably with very little money is an integral part. It's actually an integral part of preceding the cost of living crisis, because there are always people who are challenged financially.
Thank you. I know our food banks are doing great work with handing out slow cookers and things that, you know, help us cook with as little energy as possible. Councillor Maguire next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to go back to the way the recommendations are worded, and I think Val picked that up in their introduction, and Councillor King's made reference to it as well. And I would just want to advise the committee, for those of us who are on adults and health, we had a similar issue last week, where again it was about joint commissioning. In this case, I think it was mental health, if I recall rightly, and Peterborough were rather targeting and using a much smaller sum in any joint commission. And I think what's important is that it's not subject to approval by Peterborough. So little b really ought to be, because it did get a bit convoluted even at the end, and they were trying to amend it last week. It's subject to agreement with Peterborough City Council to jointly commission, and then in the event of such agreement, to agree with Peterborough City Council that the County Council should act as the lead commissioner. But I think give some sort of guidance as to how it ought to be worded, because it does look wrong. It's, you know, we don't need Peterborough City Council's approval for this. But the point I wanted to just pick up from, again, from Councillor King's question was, in the event that Peterborough chose not to, for whatever reason, affordability, the rest of it, not to enter into such a contract, would the cost to the county actually end up increasing, or is it because there's a scale crossing this? So the amount that's shown later on in paragraph 2.5, as far as the county councils, because it does raise the question, why do we need to have a joint commission? Why couldn't we separately commission, and the timing could be done here? But that's a separate question, Chairman. It doesn't need to be answered here. But I think it is important that we are not seeking Peterborough City Council's approval.
I think as I read it, it's approval to jointly commission, and I guess the other side of that is if they decide not to jointly commission, we don't need any approval to jointly commission.
So-
Therefore, we will go ahead as Cambridgeshire County Council
So it's seeking agreement,
without.
Chairman.
So, yeah.
I think, sorry, can I just, sorry, just button in. I just want to make sure that also we are not sitting waiting to hear Peterborough decision. So, you know, whether it's jointly or not, it's not materially impacting on our timeline, because we know it will take time to go out to market and so on. So.
We have things in motion, and I'm afraid to breathe anywhere near it. It just seems to be incredibly sensitive.
Councillor King and then Councillor Hoy, please.
Thank you. My question is around recommendation D, which is asking us to delegate the responsibility for awarding this contract. It's a lot of money, nearly 2.3 million. Plus, this document is very light on details of what we're going to get for that money and what type of services you're proposing to spend that money on. I'd like to see this come back to committee with details of what that contract looks like, who's going to be providing it, what is going to be provided within it, how much it's going to cost, so that we as a committee can make that decision and not, you know, just delegate it and not know what's happening with this money. So my question is, you know, why are we doing that? Why are we not bringing it back to committee?
I think this is probably the practice that we've normally followed, but it's quite certainly before it goes out, before it's approved, it goes to obviously the chair of the committee and vice chair of the committee for approval in terms of what the procurement evaluation has concluded. But I think it's up to the committee to decide what process they would want, which route they would want to go down.
Thank you. On that line, can I just check the figures in 2.5, assuming PCC don't want a joint service, that's just 1.75 million, just 1.75 million, I don't mean just, for a Cambridgeshire cost. Or is that, sorry, is that cost whether they join or not? That's how much we would be contributing.
That's what we have in the public
So we
health
wouldn't be
budget against it.
contributing the 2.27.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, just one thing. I've been sort of mulling over whether to speak on this, to be honest, because I always feel like perhaps because obviously, you know, on my side, I perhaps shouldn't comment on these matters. But actually, I think in some ways, maybe I should, because perhaps I can give an insight and a view to it that perhaps people haven't thought of. So one thing I never see in any of these policies is any kind of links with mental health, because obviously, like my size, I've been this size for probably 20 years now. And I think obviously now, like perhaps I'm in a much better state than I was perhaps when I started to put the weight on. But I think the problem is if you don't nip it in the bud early on, it then becomes sort of almost untenable. So now, you know, I haven't got any health issues. It's not an issue with sort of not being able to cook healthy meals. It's not being an issue with being able to avoid all the things that people are saying actually isn't an issue. It's just, I think people get to a point where it's almost, I think, perhaps too overwhelming because they've almost kind of gone too far over the precipice to actually come back from that. And I suppose, yeah, I wouldn't want that to happen to anyone else, particularly our young people. And I think that sometimes the interventions we think of are almost too simplistic. So I understand that, yes, people are struggling for money, and I'm not sort of trying to make that anyway, sort of put that down in any way. But I just think this is a much more complex issue than that. I don't think it's just about money. I also think, for example, a lot of the deprived areas actually don't have easy access to a supermarket. So one thing I've long talked about is the Waterleys area in Wisbech. We've spent millions there on various strategies that we think are going to work. But actually, if you live in that area, you can't easily get to a supermarket. It doesn't matter whatever supermarket you choose, you can't easily get there because there's, it's about 2 miles to the supermarket. A taxi would cost you perhaps £10 just to get there and back. So it's things like that. I think there are always much more, and I've always said that actually solution to solving, in my view, a lot of the problems there would actually be to build a supermarket right in the middle of the ward, but we never really think outside the box. So I'd quite like to see in future us to be a bit more maybe imaginative. And the final point was just, I agree with what Councillor King's saying. I really think we should bring this back before we award the contract. Not to be difficult, it's just given the A, the large amount of money, and B, given the last item where we've had to potentially extend contracts, I wouldn't want us to be in a situation where we're making a decision today to award a contract when we don't know anything about it. We don't know who's going to have it, what services is going to be offered, or anything like that. And I just feel it would be really useful for us to have it back just as a second oversight. Not that I imagine there's going to be any great problems with it, but I just feel that we should have another look at it.
I think it's impossible to underestimate the complexity of obesity. I think if we understood it, perhaps we wouldn't be where we were with it being the biggest public health issue we have at the moment. But I don't know if you saw the appendix that came with this paper that described in each tier the services that would be included in each tier. And it also includes a multidisciplinary team assessment, which includes a clinical psychologist, because we know that basically that element, the sort of mental health, the psychology of overweight and obesity is absolutely critical in any attempt to address it. And that's something it was another gap, and we put it into the new service, and you'll see it in the multidisciplinary team box. And I agree with you about, I think it's definitely not sort of, eat less and do more. There's much more to it than that.
Thank you. We can make it so that comes to spokes, and if there's any issue with that, we can bring it back to CYP following that, if that would be acceptable. Seeing nodding. Councillor Boulat, please.
Thank you, Chair. I found the results of this study here really interesting, especially the differences around gender. So boys being particularly affected in year 6, the largest increases, as well as the disparities noted between different ethnic groups. So I'd like to raise an additional complexity in this discussion, which is about just awareness of what services exist, because I often get contacted, especially from people whose first language is not English, who many of them are not even registered with a GP, let alone aware of the existence of more specialized programs. So I think one of the big tasks is actually making people aware and having better ways to target specific groups and actually make them aware of what provision actually exists, because the first step to actually access anything is making sure that it is there and you can access it, and it's free of charge as well, because a lot of people are put off just because they assume things about the health services that is just not true, and there's a lot of misinformation going on. So often, even in my ward, and I'm sure it's true for a lot of fellow councillors, I meet on the doorstep people who are from different nationalities and who think like, well, I don't want to use this because they will charge me, or like they have various misassumptions about the NHS, or prefer to use services in another country. And of course, with COVID and with the cost of living crisis, other people can't afford to go back as often to actually do their healthcare checks. So that is like a point I wanted to raise, that kind of the awareness and I guess the education around this issue is really, really important, and making sure that we include all our communities. And I wanted just to ask about the on the page where you have the on 132, where on the step 2 it mentions there's consultation, what do parents want, need. I was wondering in general to what extent there is consultation with parents and young people part of this process, Yeah, if you can comment on that, to what extent consultation will be considered as part of the various initiatives, because that will be a very good way to bring into all the complexities that were mentioned, including by Councillor Ho and others in this discussion today. Thank you.
I think the point about how do we make sure that people who have, you know, language barriers, for example, to have the knowledge and then access to service. I think that's part of the, I would link that back to quality assurance, because I think any service that you're commissioned should be able to demonstrate how they're going to access groups who would find it, who would experience barriers in accessing services. And I think with regards to involving children, young people and their families in this, I think it has to be part. And I think what, in preparation for this, we obviously the appendix details the sort of service model and some elements of the service specification, and that needs to be tested out with young people and their families. And that's part of this first 3 months of the procurement, market testing and doing that engagement with children, young people and their families.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton, please.
How does what we're doing fit in with the national picture? Are we doing anything different? Are we doing anything more? Where do we stand in relation to the national picture?
I think there has been support over the years of obesity and the acknowledgement that obesity is a severe public health issue. The planned, there was some planned legislation which it will now, I think, will not happen in the near future around advertising and so forth. But one of the interesting things that I think will probably be picked out with the health and well-being stroke ICS strategy, which has, well, one, it has children and young people as one of its priorities, but the second priority is the environment, and the proposed area of focus is childhood and adult obesity. And one of the things that we're doing at the moment is looking at what local policies and local strategies can do to affect the environment in which people live, and so, you know, the obesogenic environment. So it's looking, for instance, like fast food outlets, zones around schools, comes back to the active travel element. So there is that national context, which is kind of unsure at the moment. But so we are looking at what we can do at a local level, which we know is evidence-based. And I think the key word in all this is evidence-based. What changes in the environment we know through evidence can have an impact on people's behaviours. And again, but it's in the context at the moment. It is in the. I must stress. I brought it up at the beginning. I think the cost of living crisis is a great concern to us at the moment.
Yeah, while you're talking also, what was going through my mind was coordination. So we've got 3 papers on the agenda today, and I know Councillor Satter mentioned this earlier, 3 interconnected papers. And is there real coordination on the healthy schools, on child obesity and on children's mental health services? And can we really strengthen that coordination?
That actually goes back to the Healthy Schools initiative, because what we found with Healthy Schools is that it did really strengthen the coordination. They have steering group meetings, which I started to re-attend after COVID, and from about having 5 or 6 partners on the table, there are about 40 partners on the table. That and I think the evidence, which hopefully the report that we'll send you will show how the different services are working together in a more collaborative way. But what that needs to be is it can be improved upon. And I think that's part of the review, not just of the 5 to 19, which is principally school nursing, but also of all these other services, including the mental health services, and how they can be better aligned and better coordinated, basically more effective and efficient.
And I guess within that, it's coordinating with the ICS as that develops.
That is the other element in it, exactly. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Ambrose-Smith, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question for yourself, actually. You've just made the decision on recommendation D to go to the spokes as well as the chair. That's a 3rd tier, and that means the committee is now a 3rd tier. Is the committee system really broken, therefore, at Cambs County Council now, and that we're not really warranted? as an influence on decisions on the committee. And if you're going to carry on or this, not change it to the committee, could I ask you to take the recommendations A, B, and C separately to D?
Can you just ask your question again? Because I missed part of that, sorry.
Sorry for mumbling. You've decided to, or you've asked rather, that we actually, the recommendation B, recommendation B goes to the vice chair and chair, and then you will then take it to the spokes as well, whatever the spokes is. Yeah, I understand, but that's pushing the committee down to a third tier. And I'm asking, are we therefore really relevant as a committee if we can't make decisions such as
We've
this?
approved that.
Sorry, I thought I was talking. Is that okay? And therefore, if you do go to the spokes, we do agree to go to spokes, I would ask you to take the recommendations A, B, and C together, and then D separately.
And recommendation E separately or in with A, B and C?
C's on my paperwork. I'll take it to you.
A, B, C, D and E, no. But,
I've got a separate, I've got two C's.
I guess from our point of view, it's not about moving the committee to a third tier, and I certainly wouldn't have advocated that. I guess the agreement today is in the theory, and the agreement later is the authorisation, which we would adapt to include CYP spokes, so that every party is represented at that discussion. But yes, we can take recommendations separately. That would be fine. Councillor Bradnam, please.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt Councillor Ambrose Smith. I was simply reacting rather suddenly, thinking that wouldn't be a derogation of our responsibility if this committee has approved the action that we're taking. So that was all I was trying to say. Thank you.
Councillor Hoy, please.
I take Councillor Ambrose Smith's point on this. I'm not doing it to be difficult. It's just because this is not the first time this has happened when we've had quite high value contracts that have then been decided outside the meeting. And obviously we don't have a cabinet system here. It is a committee system. And I think there's actually been a really good discussion today across all parties. I think it's actually been really useful, things we've heard. And I'm just minded, obviously, we don't have Andrew on spokes, and we don't have the Roman Catholic Diocese on spokes either. And I think this is actually quite a good forum, because I think this committee does run very well. I don't think we're particularly kind of parochial or political about things. And I just think it wouldn't do any harm to bring it back personally.
I guess my biggest issue with our agenda is agenda planning and timing, a number of items that we have to bring back. Let's take it to a vote and see where we are, unless there are any further comments on the report. Sorry, Councillor Slatter, did you have?
Yes, I mean, we are very keen to include all sorts of aspects, and it hasn't specifically been mentioned in this paper, which is actually what teachers teach, to make sure that in the curriculum is a good understanding of one's physiology, because sometimes I think if we arm our children early on with an understanding that their body craves sugar and fat, and sometimes they've got to hang on and do something else instead than eat that bag of crisps, I think that just gives them that bit of extra. And I'm sure that biology teachers and so on are well aware of this. I don't want us to be teaching them how to suck eggs, but we do need to make sure we have their input, because this should be embedded in the curriculum. It's not just a matter of the school nurse coming in or somebody else. It's in the understanding of one's body and not being taken for a ride by it, as it were, and being able to understand one's changes is really important.
Thank you. I do know it takes part of the PHSE curriculum, certainly, but I think Rashenda wants to speak to us.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify, obviously, the only decision-making power rests with the committee. There is no decision-making power outside of the committee. So the fact that decisions are made now but are in consultation subsequently with members is just to ensure oversight during the process. So the decision very much rests with the committee. The only point in terms of the bringing it back to committee, just so that everybody's aware, is obviously the committee only meets every 2 or 3 months. So that might lead to just a timing issue, but just so members are aware, but obviously the decision is absolutely with you.
Councillor King, please.
Thank you. Just on that note, perhaps we should meet more regularly.
Thank you. So if we move to a vote on that, co-opted members of the committee are eligible to vote on this item, and the committee is being asked to support the following recommendations. If we take A, B, C and E first, is that all right? All right. If somebody could help Councillor Ambrose Smith with which ones we're doing, no, it's fine. So if we take A, B, C and E first, which are a competitive procurement commission child weight management service with a contract duration of 3 years with an option of extending for 2 additional years with a break point at year 4, subject to approval by Peterborough City Council to jointly commission the child weight management system with Peterborough City Council, and subject to approval by Peterborough City Council to agree that the Cambridgeshire County Council act as lead commissioner and undertake the procurement. And E, to authorise Pathfinder Legal Services Limited to draft and complete the necessary contract documentation. All those in favour? Oh, sorry, Councillor Maguire.
I thought from the discussion we'd had that we were going to follow the line that the adults took in terms of this. It's not subject to approval by Peterborough, but subject to agreement with Peterborough.
I was taking it as the approval is to jointly commission, not the approval is to commission Cambridgeshire.
So, but D specifically says subject to approval by Peterborough City to agree. We don't need their, you know, what
No, it says subject to approval by Peterborough City Council to jointly commission. Oh, see, sorry.
Yeah. What we're actually seeking is if it's approved with Peterborough, then we're going for a jointly one. Then it's to agree with Peterborough that we become the lead and not by approval. And that was how it was agreed by Adults Health. Yeah. I think I've got some.
Yeah, I think Regenda's got the wording that we agreed at Adults and Health, and I thought we were going to put that in as well. It's a bit in bold from our decision.
There'll be a short adjournment. Hang on. Shenda says no. No, you're fine. So C currently says subject to approval by Peterborough City Council to agree that we act as lead commissioner. Do we want subject to agreement in there? No.
Can I suggest, Chairman, to help that C should read subject to agreement with Peterborough City Council, the County Council leads. Yeah. So it's subject
to agreement by Peterborough City Council that Cambridgeshire.
Not by, but with. Yeah. As it's an agreement, it's a with, not a by.
Agreement with, not by. Yeah.
That go around it, Chairman?
I think so. I'd take out to agree. Yeah.
It's in the papers for the Adults and Health, the amended wording.
So subject to agreement with Peterborough City Council that Cambridgeshire County Council act as lead commissioner and undertake the procurement, and should they not agree, we will act as lead commissioner because we're the only people anyhow. Marvellous. A, B, C and E, all those in favour, please. Thank you. And recommendation D. Recommendation D, to authorise the Director of Public Health in consultation with the Chair, Vice Chair and Children and Young People Spokes Committee to award a contract up to the value of 2.275 million to the successful provider, subject always to the compliance with all required legal processes. All those in favour, please. Thank you. All those against? And no abstentions, I think. Sorry, Rishanda, have you got a result of that one?
Yeah, so just to confirm, so recommendations A, B, C as amended and E were passed unanimously. Recommendation D was passed by a majority.
Thank you very much. I'm going to suggest a 10-minute adjournment at that point. Apart from anything else, I need a glass of water. So back at 4:10. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, everybody, and welcome back to those joining online. Our next item 10, is the Intensive Therapeutic Support Hub, and Lucy Lawyer, Strategic Lead for Integrated Commissioning 0 to 25, is joining us remotely to introduce this report. Thank you, Lucy.
I'm here. No, I am here.
Remotely from
As
the
if
other
by
end
magic,
of
I'll
the
teleport to
room.
myself.
Welcome, Lucy. Thank you.
Thank you. It says not able to use any sort of technology. Thank you. So this paper is asking for committee to support 2 policy changes within disabled children's services around our provision of residential short breaks, and to support 2 key decisions that will be taken to Strategy and Resources Committee. To summarise the paper, it follows a key decision that this committee took in 2020 to insource the residential and overnight short break services for disabled children from the external market back into the control of the local authority. That was following a comprehensive review of those services and a public consultation, to which one of the significant priorities that arose from those 2 pieces of work were the need for more intensive therapeutic interventions for disabled children, more integrated services across education, health and social care, and services that were much more flexible and responsive to emerging crisis. So that piece of work has happened. We've insourced those services, and we've undertaken a feasibility study on whether we still need those services as a result of that review, which we found that we did. And at the same time, the Department for Education earlier this year announced a £45 million budget to support innovative respite solutions for disabled children that promoted inclusion in schools and preventing exclusion of particularly service education for disabled children, and to respond to emerging crisis. So the first time I think the department has recognised the interface between education and social care, particularly in sustaining education and support for children in their communities. Cambridgeshire submitted a bid to do just that, to provide an intensive therapeutic support hub, and we were successful in securing £1 million worth of funding for 2022 to 2023, with the opportunity to bid for a further £1 million funding in the next financial year and another further £1 million in the year after. In order to mobilise, and we've summarised within the paper what that hub looks to do, but really briefly, it brings education, health and social care services under one roof. It provides outreach, workforce development for schools and for families, as well as providing high-level short breaks and intervention for children and young people that are in crisis. In order to do that, the local authority needed to provide a capital asset to host the hub, which we have identified the Hawthorns in Cambridge, a previously run maintained children's home, and require a significant investment to repurpose that home in order to get it to standard for Ofsted registration as a children's home, and for the registration of the education provision. We are therefore asking Strategy and Resources Committee to approve prudential borrowing for us to do that capital work, in order for the policy change to include this hub into disabled children's short breaks offer. Any questions? Hopefully that's covered everything.
I think my first question is, what would happen should we not be successful with the bid for the following year and the year after? How would that look, and what would we be looking to provide with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've taken a business case to Capital Programme Board to support both the capital investment, but also the ongoing revenue costs if we were to have to provide that service ourselves. A range of non-financial, but also financial savings and cost avoidances have been submitted as part of that capital application, and effectively the savings or cost avoidances that we would achieve, both in terms of keeping children in special schools in their local area, out of children in care, so not coming into the care system, and out of area residential education placements, effectively neutralises the revenue costs that it would incur the local authority to take that on. However, what I would say I can't quote the department and they won't quote themselves, but this particular pilot is to inform national policy change around services for disabled children and children with SEN. They are really, really keen that the programmes awarded in year 1 are moved through into year 2 and to year 3 to ensure that I guess the outcomes of that pilot, the impact of those pilots are really seen through the prolonged period of time. So we are going through the application for year 2 funding right now, as I understand it, and we will know by November whether we've got year 2 funding. So those things are sort of happening concurrently, but I think the £1 million revenue cost we've seen in many papers just presented today, that sufficiency and capacity for children in care and SEN, the budgets and the demands that we're seeing on those, the pressures are really significant. So we would only need to make 2 or 3 placements into the hub instead of into out of area provision for us to have neutralised the cost to the local authority.
Brilliant, thank you. Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, and you mentioned on the, I think it's page 142, maybe one around that, you say that's it, bottom of 142, you say in Cambridgeshire there were 200 children awaiting specialist placement. I just wondered if you had a breakdown of roughly what areas they're from.
I don't, but we can certainly get that information for you. That's cited in a range of different papers, particularly around the high needs block safety valve funding. So we can get that information for you.
Yeah, obviously, but we're not going to get that for today, and we need to be making a decision. So the reason I'm asking my question, well, there's two parts to my question. So first of all, I didn't know until literally just right now that where this facility was going to be. And I'm just kind of in my mind thinking, how does it fit in being in Cambridge when we know that actually probably the highest needs are based on that paper in Finland, and second of all, with congestion charging that's being proposed, do we really want to be bringing more people into the city when we're being told that we want to reduce car movements? So do we want to be bringing people into the city and also potentially giving them an excess cost? So I suppose on that point, I don't feel like I could support it being in Cambridge. But the actual thing I'm most concerned about, to be honest, is obviously I was on the committee when we first spoke about ending the residential short breaks out of house and bringing them back in house. But there's a number of things that are said in this paper which kind of makes me feel like this isn't going to be a respite facility, which we all know are desperately needed, and more of a way to kind of top up school places, because it's mentioned in the report about how many children are currently waiting independent tutors, and it just feels to me like this is a way of us kind of finding placements for children that should perhaps otherwise be in school and we haven't got a school for them, and creating kind of additional capacity in SEND services. Now, obviously, I'm not kind of against that. We want more capacity in SEND. I'm not opposed to that, but I'm just unsure. I don't want that to be done at a loss to people that then need respite care, because if we're filling this with people that are perhaps should be at school, we aren't going to have any space available for people that need short breaks, and people desperately do need short breaks.
Yeah. So just, I suppose, to respond to both parts. So in terms of the short break provision and the residential provision, that's all additional capacity to the existing short break offer. So initially, when we insourced the services, we were talking about reconfiguring the services to free up budget and resources to be able to deliver this hub. Actually, the feasibility study told us that those services are already at capacity, and the complexity of need is actually going up. So this doesn't replace any of our existing resources. It's all completely new money and new resources. Secondly, in terms of the location, it's an existing local authority asset that we are able to repurpose within the timelines that the department have given us to work towards. So if we were to go and purchase a property and then reconfigure and redesign, we wouldn't have been able to meet the department's timelines to be able to receive the grant. And also that our data tells us that actually from a disabled children's perspective, that it's spread across the local area, although differences in different areas. So having a central point to the county was considered to be not preferable, but taking all of those issues into account, the availability of an asset, the timelines, and having a central location, strategic assets supported the decision for us to repurpose the Hawthorns. I don't know if you know the Hawthorns, but it's a vast building. My colleague who's with me today actually is and welcome any members that wanted to join it are doing some walkarounds of the property to try and explain what it is, but it's a significantly large property. The education provision will be separate to the short breaks provision and the residential provision, so it's all added capacity, it doesn't replace. And sorry, just in your third point around replacing education provision, that was more to contextualise the financial pressures. This will be very much for schools to be able to say, actually, we might need to take a short break. We might need to be able to repurpose a particular area within a school, for example, in order to be able to support children to go back into that special school and not into the independent provision that perhaps the trajectory they're on at the moment.
On that, I just don't feel that you could consider that a central location personally. And I think that looking at what we've talked about at previous committee meetings, particularly around transport, that's going to be more over the suggested time for a number of areas. So are we going to be sending children with severe disabilities in taxis to Cambridge? You know, a vast cost to ourselves when we already know how precious the budget is, be really, you know, distressing for them actually to have to be in a taxi for that length of time. You see, I just don't feel that this is the right location. And while I understand what you're saying about, you know, you believe it's the right facility, we haven't seen, there's nothing in here about any kind of other buildings that were considered, why they were discounted, the reasons they were discounted. So I don't see how we could make a decision based on that. And just the final thing, I do think it is a really important point actually, is that we're saying that we're trying to reduce emissions and we're putting a facility which is going to be bringing a number of people in taxis into the centre of Cambridge, which we keep being told we're supposed to be reducing vehicle movements. So I think this is only going to increase them.
I mean, in all honesty, we don't have another asset. So we have worked with strategic assets to look at all of the local authority assets that we've got. We don't have anything bigger than 2, 3 or 4 bedroom sort of ex-caretakers houses that are on school sites. So we've exhausted the local assets that we've got owned by the local authority. And this was the only one that was considered in terms of its size to be able to accommodate a hub of this size. Otherwise, we would be looking to purchase a property.
Thank you. I wonder if you can give us a briefing note of the kind of where all the other areas are, where the other places are that are used for this kind of thing.
To do that.
And I guess having something in Cambridge, you'd use appropriately either the most local place or the most appropriate in terms of need anyhow. So there would be some reduction in travel for some of those children anyhow.
I will ask property to do that because they've also done carbon emissions impact assessments, etc. for the capital programme board. So I'll ask property to do a briefing for you.
Brilliant, thank you. Councillor Ambrose Smith, please.
Hello, thank you. Would the services on offer be available for children who live outside and families who live outside of Cambridgeshire?
Not typically. We would have commissioning arrangements whereby if we were underutilising those services, which I'm sure we would agree is highly unlikely, that we could offer those services to children and young people outside of the area, but it would be with absolute explicit agreement of probably the DCS.
Thank you. Councillor King, please.
Yeah, Lucy, just building on the conversation started by Sam here. So what we're looking here is a pilot, right? And what you're saying to us is what we're all hoping that this pilot will feed into a government policy which will make those hubs sort of hopefully more essential, statutory, you know, and the process smoother. So can we, knowing that one hub is going to partially kind of close the gap, the huge gap we have, can we think about the bigger picture and you know, assume that all goes well and the policy comes on board, think about what's going to be our next step, where our next hub is going to be, taking into account the needs of other regions of Cambridgeshire, of course, in that sense. I mean, has anything been done in about those next steps and how that might look like yet? And if not, can we do that?
Yeah, so we've got the the Joint Children with Disability Sufficiency Statement that is published on the on Cambridgeshire Insight, which shows the trajectory and the demand for services of this nature. We will obviously be looking to take local learning in terms of the impact and the outcomes that the hub achieves and what that means in terms of our future commissioning priorities, and whether we continue on that journey or whether we look at something different. So yes, absolutely, we would look at using the learning and the impact from this project particularly, and how we, regardless of whether the DFE continue with the pilots thereafter. So we would want to make sure that we did that.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire, please.
Thank you. Could I just check with you, Lucy? The successful bid is actually a consortium bid, which included Peterborough City Council. So following on from the question as to the location and whether children from authorities outside, will that facility be available for Peterborough children? Because that technically is not in-house as far as Peterborough is concerned.
So under exactly the same conditions. So just recognising that some of those children and young people live very close to the border.
Well, I know I represent.
Yeah, absolutely. So under the same conditions as my previous response, that under the explicit agreement of the local authority, Peterborough children and young people could access it, but it would be at a charge. So it's not a joint submission in terms of it's available for children and young people in both councils, readily available.
So they'd be still treated as coming out of their local authority area, even though in the submission, well, in the paper in front of us, in paragraph 211.4, it actually examples the fact that Cambridgeshire and Peterborough together have made 23 independent out of area placements since 2020, costing over 4.25 million. An alternative like the hub could have avoided some of these placements, which infers that it is actually a joint thing. It is something available. It is part of Peterborough's provision, if you like. That's what it infers. Otherwise,
so to be absolutely explicit, it's a Cambridgeshire service, and it's to serve Cambridgeshire. We just have the mechanism for Peterborough to use it should we believe that that's the right thing to do, be it that we're under occupancy. I think the references to Peterborough are really around the nature of shared services for disabled children and shared services for SEND. So from a commissioning perspective, we consider the needs of both councils, but for the purposes of this project, it's very much for one, given both the statutory education services and the statutory disabled children services are both sitting under the same directorate.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
From an operational point of view, just to be clear.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton, please.
Really a point of clarification. You've explained the fact that the location, or the venue rather, that the property is there available. Did I understand you to say that also there was a very tight timetable for applying for the grant, and having the property available made it much more likely that you would get the grant?
Yes, so we've received the grant. The grant is until, well, it was till March 23. That's been extended to August 23, but we have to have the property ready and serving our children and young people by April 23 of next year. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to draw down that £1 million funding or apply for the year 2 funding. Okay. So it's one of the grant conditions is that we have a property ready, fit for purpose by the end of the year 1 funding. We just, the DFE have kindly extended it for us, but that's the condition of the grant.
Okay, so the two things go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
And can I just follow that up? So this is a pilot project, and then if this is successful, that would be a long-term hub. So just to answer the question about the congestion charge, of course, that this would be exempt from congestion charging according to the proposals. Thanks.
Thank you. I guess my only other question would be in terms of getting it up and running by April. I assume you've already started looking at staffing and all of those kind of considerations, and working with particularly the medical staff that you'll need on board.
Yeah, so we've got an overarching programme board and work streams. We're recruiting to the senior leadership team of the hub currently. So the registered managers, the team managers, we've appointed in-house a programme lead. And then conversely, in terms of the property, property have started the procurement for the construction, subject to strategy and resources approving the capital. One thing I did want to note is that we are working with NHS England to see if they are able to fund the capital. So we're running those two things side by side. If they choose to approve some or all, that will obviously just offset what the local authority are going to borrow. So we're running several work streams all at the same time to try and get the best deal for the council, really.
And the best deal for the children involved.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, having read the report, my views were very similar to Councillor Hoy in respect of where the venue was going to be placed. But since your explanation, I understand the reason being, perhaps if we'd had a little bit more explanation, you know, within the report, that would have made us feel a little bit better. Yeah. The other bit I would, it's the age range. So we've got 2.2. So we've got age ranges. The service will be registered for 8 to 18 with a scope to consider registration up to 25. How do we engage with the different age ranges? You know, potentially 8 to 25. It's not obviously going to be like a school. So I'm just wondering how we're going to cope with that quite a wide age range.
Yeah. So in terms of the age range, that's really just to make sure that the service is accessible to all of the children and young people within Cambridgeshire. We know that particularly services of this nature, 11 to 15 years is where we're seeing the greatest level of need and complexity for the children and young people. So whilst our focus is 11 to 15 years, we've kept the age range broad, so we're not excluding any accessibility of provision. In terms of children and young people accessing the provision, that will all be managed by the registered manager under the Children's Homes Regulations. So that all sits very much within a regulatory framework in terms of how they manage matching, how they manage risk amongst different children and young people of different ages. We know that some children sit really well together who are of a similar age. Likewise, we know some children actually respond better to children and young people that are older or younger. So there's no rigor around who we're having in the service and why. It will be very much needs led and led by matching under the regulations.
Thank you. Any further questions? Anyone? Haven't missed anyone. Good. So if we move now to the report recommendations, co-opted members of the committee are eligible to vote on recommendations A and B of this item. So if we take those two separately first. So recommendation A is to endorse the inclusion of a hub model into the portfolio of services for disabled children, and B for the hub to be delivered within the portfolio of in-house provider services as an internally commissioned service. All those in favour, please. That looks unanimous. Thank you. And then recommendations C and D.
Would you mind if we take these separately, please? Thanks.
Yep, so recommendation C first, to support the key decision to the Strategy and Resources Committee for capital funding and prudential borrowing from Strategy and Resources Committee to develop a council property asset. All those in favour, please. Thank you. And recommendation D, to support the key decision, Strategy and Resources to use the Hawthorns, a Cambridgeshire County Council property to host the hub. All those in favour, please. Thank you. All those against? And any abstentions? Thank you. Rishenda, please.
Thank you, Chair. So recommendations A, B and C were carried unanimously. Recommendation D was carried by a majority.
Thank you, and thank you, Lucy. I'd love to come and visit the Hawthorns, and yeah, please do contact me and we'll arrange a date. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Item 11, Item 11 is the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee Annual Report 2021 to 2022. Before I ask the officers to introduce this report, I'd like to place on record the committee's thanks to the members of the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee for all of their work during this period covered, and indeed the officers involved. Nicola Curley, Director of Children's Services, is going to introduce this one. Thanks, Nicola.
Thank you. And I'd just like to acknowledge that we have both Councillor Braddon and Councillor Slatter here today, so I'm sure that they have things they might wish to add as well. So this is the usual annual report for Corporate Parenting Subcommittee. It details the work of the committee and particularly our engagement or its engagement with young people through the Children in Care Council and Care Leavers Forum, and the promotion and needs of children and young people and those leaving our care. It's particularly done a lot of work, I think, with the Foster Carer Committee this year very successfully, and has achieved a number of outcomes which are on, I think, page 168 of the report, but particularly focus around issues with strengths and difficulties questionnaires, advocating to NHS England about availability of dentistry, scrutiny on out of area placements, placement stability, and monitoring of the fostering service. So I'm very happy to take questions, or indeed Councillor Bradman may wish to. Thank you.
So before I open the report to the committee for questions and debate, I'd like to ask Councillor Bradman, as chair of the subcommittee, if there's anything she'd like to draw to our attention within the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to point out that we've been endeavouring on the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee to have real active engagement from the young people, children and young people from the Children in Care Council. And to give credit to my predecessor in the chair, I know Liz Every was really concerned to achieve that as well, and did so in many ways. We've had our most recent subcommittee on the 29th of September, and we had representatives of the Children in Care Council attending here in the Starling room, which is below this room. And we need some work together on how to work together with that, of course, and enabling the young people to take part really productively. But actually, it was really good to have them along to get them used to being part of a committee. And one of the things I think I ought to flag up early is that one of the things they want to do is to address with us some of the terms we use as members of CYP and also as members of the subcommittee. And for example, they don't especially like the term placement, and they like, because it makes them feel like things being placed, which they don't like very much. And so we're working with them to try and work out what's a more acceptable term for them. That's difficult because, of course, officers use that to mean a number of different things. And so we talked about home or homes with them, which was useful. So it's really good that they're taking part, and I look forward to that progressing and giving us much more feedback into our formal meeting in November. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from the committee? Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to say, first of all, thank you to everyone that's on that committee. It's, obviously a very important job that they do, and obviously they're doing it very well. Just a comment I wanted to make, really, it's not a criticism aimed at anyone, because I'm sure this is the case up and down the country, but I just thought it was very sad in the scorecard to see quite how many, when it's got the length of time in care, just how many children have been in care for over 6 years. I think when a third of our children, when you add up the 11 to 15 years and the 6 to 10 years, comes to about a third of the children we've got in care have been there for over 6 years, and that's obviously going to have a massive impact on their life. And also when you're looking at the age range, it's going to be the older children, and we know that they particularly are harder to place in foster care and will probably be with us for the rest of their life, well, until their adult life. So it's a bit of a bleak picture in a way, I suppose. I don't know necessarily there's any easy answers, because I think we've all been talking about probably 20 or 30 years what the solutions are, and no one seems to have necessarily come up with them yet. But I think we have to just keep doing what we're doing and trying, really, everyone.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp, please.
Sorry, Chair,
sorry,
did
Anna.
Ms
Did you
Curley want to respond to that?
I can respond to that. I appreciate it was more a comment, wasn't it? I think what I'd say is that being in care isn't necessarily a negative thing. And what we try really, really hard to do is to make sure that the children who are in our care receive a really excellent service. And actually we do improve their outcomes. You're absolutely right, though. The older a child is when they come into the system, the more challenging it is for them to come out the other side quickly, perhaps into, you know, adoption or special guardianship. What we've had in Cambridge is we have had much higher numbers of children in care historically. So you've got a group of children who do need to, who are there, who are going to stay there until they become adults. You're absolutely right. But we are seeing less children coming in than we ever did before. So it is all moving in the right direction. But we do have a group of children who are with us, who will be with us long term. Sometimes that is a really positive thing for them. We need to make sure it's a positive thing for all of our children.
Thanks, Nicola. Councillor Sharp, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I say, you know, thanks to everybody involved in the report and the work, and more importantly, the work that they're doing. I've just got one question. It's on page 162. We've got the headline figure of 632, and we've got a target below 546. I just wondered where that target comes from, how that's arrived at. Because obviously we're above it, but you know, I'm just really looking behind that particular figure. Perhaps Councillor Bradman can answer it.
It's interesting you asked that, Councillor Sharp, because I've asked exactly the same question, and I've been reassured that it is the culmination of a very detailed piece of work on where children are coming from and the likelihood of them coming from those sources. So I find the target interesting, but I'm assured it's a very soundly arrived at target. So I can't give you the detail, but I'm reassured that it's a reasonable target.
So this is in relation to our per 10,000 rate of children coming into care. Is that what you're talking about? Yes, I think.
It's the actual target on the paper, as I say, page 162, which is ours.
Yeah, so that's based on, so Councillor Brown's absolutely right. It's based on a number of different factors. What we do is we look at statistical neighbours, we look at the national figure, and then we look at what we try and do is project what we think would be best practice and what we think. So this goes back to some of our earlier conversations about demand and what we think may or may not be impacting on the system as we go forward. So it is quite a complicated calculation. And we try very hard to work out what the ideal number is. It is just a number, however, so I do really want to reassure people that if it needs to be more than that, because in a particular year there are more children that need to come into care, then it absolutely will be. But what we know, you know, and this is where Councillor Hoy is absolutely right, is that coming into care is meant to be a last resort, not a first resort. So we want to make sure that our preventative services are as effective as possible, as few children come into care as possible, but then once they're in care, they receive really good services. So it's about that balance, and we think that's about right, but we do review it every year.
I can come back very briefly on that. Thank you for that. I don't want to go into the details of it, but I understand. I mean, in an ideal world, the target should be 0. We all know that that's not possible in the real world, but obviously, you know, as much as we can get children into a loving home environment, the better. But thanks for the report and the work being done.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Slatter next, please.
Thank you. Just briefly, I mean, everybody's very right to appreciate the work, and not really so much the subcommittee as all those foster carers that you were also mentioning. And that was one reason why we did ask for all the members to be invited to the training on the role of the foster carer, because this therapeutic parenting, particularly of our teenagers, is so vital. And I hope you all got invitations. and some of you will be able to come. Because we're all corporate parents, as Councillor Bradnam has pointed out before. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton, please.
Continuing the health theme of our meeting today, on page 163, some of the statistics are, look rather stark. I'm looking at the health service standards, where 39%, only 48 of 123 children had initial health assessment completed on time. I don't know if you can comment on that. And then obviously there's the statistic on dentistry, which we've heard about in the Adult and Health Committee. Maybe comment on that. Thanks.
Sorry, I'll take the first bit and then perhaps you just remind me the second bit. So this is a very low figure, and I would completely accept that. It has been quite challenging over a long period of time to really make inroads into the timeliness of initial health assessments. And I would want to stress that this is timeliness. It's not whether they have an assessment or not. So it's whether it's met within a certain period of time. We have made improvements, and we do have a plan with our looked after health team about trying to improve it. And I will try and look up, if I can, whilst we're talking, where we've got up to now, because it has certainly improved from that figure. But if not, I'm very happy to send a briefing note around and explain where we've got up to now, because this is March's performance. So just to clarify for the committee, this is quite a long time ago, was impacted by COVID, does take into account a number of children who refuse assessments, but it is also about getting them on the system and having them counted properly in time. So I can look that up for you, Councillor.
Thank you. And I'm sure Nicola Curley will put me right if I'm wrong, but as I recall, this is also related to the number of children who are placed out of county. And when they're placed out of county, it's harder to encourage those local authorities who are providers of healthcare to ensure that our children are seen on time in their local GP surgeries. And interestingly enough, in addition to writing a letter about dentistry, I also wrote a letter about initial health assessments, and it was sent to the relevant authorities, but we didn't receive a response, as I recall. So, you know, this is something that's very hard for our officers to chase up, because we're relying on other local authorities, neighbouring authorities, to provide healthcare services. Thank you.
I think that's answered my question on dentistry, and I was just reflecting that we really want to do our best for these children and to try to make sure that they do have access to health service and to dental services. I know it's difficult with the dental services at the moment, but I'm sure you've got that in hand.
Thank you. Canon Reid, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to reiterate the comments made by others about the work for this report and all those involved in this sector. I just wonder, though, whether there's a little bit that's understated in here, and that's the contribution of the virtual school for looked after children. I'm just thinking, looking at the section on educational outcomes, and those outcomes are improving over time, but they are still significantly lower than the non-looked after children. And I would just welcome a stronger tie-up, perhaps in the reporting sense, at these kind of instances of the work of the virtual school team, which is heavily invested in by this committee, and the work of Claire Horns, the head teacher there.
Thank you. Absolutely. Nicola.
So just to say, absolutely, it's the three prongs, isn't it? It's education, health, and placement. The scorecard is deliberately quite short, and it can't fit, if I'm honest, it can't fit any more on it in terms of performance information. We obviously have the annual report from the virtual school, which comes to both the subcommittee and I think here as well. And we do consider it all very carefully. So I wouldn't want anyone at CYP to think that this is the only account we take of educational progress for children in care. It's a key part of what we do. And we do monitor it very closely, and subcommittee is very concerned about that as well. The scorecard is meant to be just a small snapshot, and that's what it's trying to show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Boulat, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think as a member of the subcommittee, what I found most useful is to be able to have this detailed scrutiny on the various themes. So I think it's great to have those themed meetings. I wanted just to highlight a couple of areas. I think it's good to recognize there has been some improvement, especially on some of the health outcomes, as we have been discussing, although there are, of course, some significant concerns remaining. But one of the areas that really interests me, I think is of interest to this committee, is around the young people who are not in education, employment, or training. And I think there's a lot of more possibilities to explore how can we best work with Cambridgeshire Skills even more than we work currently, or with the Combined Authorities Skills Committee, or with the various other institutions, because I think that's one of the areas of concern, that we still have quite a lot of work to do to ensure that, especially now in the cost of living crisis, that our young people do have access to employment or further training if they wish to do so. And also the other area that I think it is of concern is around the accommodation. I know there's a lot of work being done into making sure that the accommodation is suitable. And I know there have been questions asked in the past of what is unsuitable accommodation. So I think that kind of two areas, in addition to what has been said, is something that we should keep on our agenda as things to look at in the year to come in the subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? No. So if we move to the recommendations, and the report recommendations are being asked to note the report, which we have done. Our thanks again to the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee, and particular the Chair and Vice Chair. Item 12. Item 12 relates to children's mental health services. Catherine Goose, Head of Children and Young People's Mental Health Commissioning and Transformation, is joining us remotely to introduce this report. Welcome, Catherine.
Afternoon, apologies, I had technical issues getting off my camera there. So.
Welcome, thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for the opportunity to come today to present the paper around children and young people's mental health. So as the paper notes, this is to provide the committee with an update on progress and of our children and young people's mental health strategy, and an overview of some of the services. I'll just go through briefly and to ensure there's time for questions. So across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, work has gone on from October last year until March to develop our children and young people's mental health strategies. This was a co-produced piece of work with a number of stakeholders across the area, including lots of children and young people, parent carers, and professionals from a wide range of different areas. And as the paper noted, there were 7 key areas that came out as priorities to ensure that we make the required improvements to move to a more service and a system for mental health that provides the best outcomes for young people. So those areas around leadership, commissioning, governance, and the need to ensure that we have the appropriate structures in place to have the right leadership to make them system improvements, about access to timely help and treatment. As it's known that it's really important that we make sure that we get children, young people seen as quickly as possible, about ensuring we include the voice and influence of children, young people, and co-production was a really key part of our strategy, and that continues to be in our work going forward, about choice of treatments and the different options available, about ensuring that this provision of support is provided to those groups of young people who we know are at most risk of mental health issues. Workforce is a key area of challenge across the system, and so key area of focus is around how we make sure we've got the right workforce, the right number and the right skills, and then about being clear about what's on offer. I think it's important, and a lot of people are saying, you know, where do we go to get the information? Just also want to note to the committee, as it noted in the paper, although there are 7 priorities, one of the areas that also came out, and we are having a specific task and finish group for all the 7 priorities, but also for another priority, and that's around transition. So that's for 16 to 25-year-olds to think about how we ensure that move from children's to adult services is undertaken in an effective way as possible. And we felt that that really needed a specific focus because of the need of that sort of age group, and also around the different people that are involved, different stakeholders between children's and adult services. So the paper goes through a range of services. Some have been in place for a while. It sort of goes through from our early intervention. So we have early intervention provision through emotional wellbeing service, and that encompasses emotional wellbeing practitioners, children wellbeing practitioners, and the new mental health support teams in schools. So the mental health support teams in schools are a national initiative, and that's around how do we ensure we provide support for schools and for young people while they're in school around their mental health and wellbeing. And as committee will note, the paper notes the 3 main functions of the mental health support team. So it's around providing evidence-based intervention, about working with schools to ensure they have a whole school approach and a whole system approach to thinking about emotional wellbeing and mental health, and to support the mental health leads in schools, which is a national programme of development that's been taking place. The paper also refers to United, which was our new early intervention service that started in July 2021, and that provides a central hub for referrals into a number of pathways, including our early intervention pathways that are provided through Ormiston Families and Centre 33. And United is a partnership between statutory and voluntary sector to try and ensure that we can reduce the bounce in the system that children have felt before, and that we ensure that we think about how we flow children through and support people and get children and young people to the right level of support when they need it. The paper also goes on to talk about some of our specialist mental health pathways, so our CAMS pathways, child and adolescent mental health, so that's around those with more severe mental health needs, and that's provided by Cambridge and Peterborough NHS Foundation Trust, who also provide our eating disorder service. We've seen an increase in the number of young people presenting with eating disorders over during the pandemic, so it's been really important to make sure we support those young people, and through that we've been doing sort of 4 main areas. So that's around increasing the capacity in the core team, about developing a home treatment team so we can reduce the number of young people who needs to go into an inpatient eating disorder bed, how we help them with their physical monitoring, because as well as having mental health concerns, the eating disorders causes some physical health issues, and how we support them, and also around a condition called ARFID, which is avoidance restrictive food intake disorder, which is a fairly new disorder that's been seen, and that's around quite a restrictive eating, and that's an area we're sort of developing, and it has quite a different presentation to some of the anorexias that we would see in eating disorders. The paper also goes on to talk about our crisis. So we've commissioned a new crisis assessment service. So that's about enhancing provision. So young people who are in the A&E departments or in the community can be assessed for their crisis needs. And also there's a home treatment pathway that sits with that. So they can be supported with those who are in who need quite intensive interventions for a time limited period. The paper also mentions the first response service, so that's our NHS 111 option 2. So that's how if any aged person across Cambridge and Peterborough has a mental health crisis, they should be able to contact NHS option 2 and get advice and support, and if they need to be assessed, that's the preferred route for that. The paper also notes around the voluntary sector. We've got quite an active voluntary sector across Cambridge and Peterborough, who there's lots of provision around for children and young people's mental health. And the paper just notes a few there. So Centre 33 is an organisation we work with quite a lot, who provide a good range of support for 13 to 25-year-olds through hubs, drop-ins, and also there's someone to talk to service, which has an outreach engagement type approach for those young people who often find it difficult at times to engage with some of our more traditional services. and Young People's Counselling Service, who provide a range of different counselling and support options across sort of Cambridgeshire. Just to note around the school-based supports, there's lots of this report details a number of the different services that are commissioned either through the NHS or in combination with the local authority. There is lots of work that also goes on in schools, so at an individual school level, and then there's work in the section on the report about school-based support. So that's being led a lot through the local authority, so around developing the competency framework. So that's ensuring that school staff feel competent and able to support the children and young people they work with, about having forums, so mechanisms for which school staff can meet and have that peer support around their kind of learning and action in terms of supporting young people. And then there's also a development of a platform for resources and information for education staff to access. Just to note in the report around access and outcomes, so one of the measures for the NHS is being around ensuring that we increase access to mental health support for children and young people. And across Cambridge and Peterborough, we did achieve the nationally set target to reach by 35% by the end of 2021. That continues to be monitored as we go forward, and the table shows the numbers. So it's moved from a percentage to an actual number of young people that we need to see. And also in addition to that, there's a national drive to ensure that we are measuring the clinical outcomes of our children and young people that we see, to ensure that not only are we seeing more children and young people, but actually we're making a clinical positive impact on their mental health and well-being. So thank you. So yeah, this report hopefully offers the committee the ask of giving a brief overview of the strategy and the services that are currently out there. Questions?
Thank you, Catherine. I'm sure we have questions. Members may well have noted the crossover between this and the scrutiny item at Adults and Health. We were given the option not to have this on the agenda today, but I know how important this is to us as a committee, and there are obviously differences between the report here today and the scrutiny item from last week. So I hope you'll forgive those of you who've seen some of this before, but I wanted to make sure you all had an opportunity to see this too. Councillor Slatter, please.
Yes, homing in on the bits of, particularly of the concern to this committee, though obviously the mental health of our young people is concern of the whole council. The mental health support teams, I think I need to talk this way to talk to Catherine through you, Chair. I'm wondering how we work out as local councillors where we sit in this. Are these teams serving an area linked to the NHS PCNs, or are they linked to district councils areas? How would I know whether the mental health team in my area was looking after all the schools? And how would we make sure that no children or young people actually get left out? Councillor Boulat's already mentioned that not everybody's with a GP. We know that not everybody's with a local school. We want to make it as place-based as possible, and I'm just wondering how you work that sort of thing out with mental health teams in schools. Thank you.
That's a very good question. So in terms of the teams, so we've currently got 6 teams, and what has happened, we have 2 teams. So in January 20, January 21 and January 22, we've had 2 teams in those 3 Januaries. And when the first 2 initial teams came out, it was very much around which schools were open to engage. And at the time, the national guidance was we couldn't work with any school that was needed improvement. That has now changed, quite rightly, to sort of say we need to make sure we are meeting the children's needs. So part of how we've identified the schools is partly about schools' engagement in the process, because it has been voluntary. In terms of then how do we map that onto either districts or PCNs, we have a list of the schools which I could share, but I think that's actually quite an interesting question, because I don't think we've necessarily mapped them specifically to PCNs or to districts. So we've got so Cambridge North and Huntingdon St Ives area. They were our first two teams. We've then got Peterborough and the Wisbech area. And then we've got another team in Peterborough, and that was at the request of the regional team because of the need in there. And then Whittlesea, March, Chatteris. So that's, and then our next teams will be in East Cambs and St Neots, and I'd have to double check around the ones that will be there in January 24. But I can certainly provide a list of all the schools so you could look, but it would be interesting actually to see how that then matches, because I don't think they necessarily sit neatly into a PCN or neatly into a district. It's very much around, we sort of took a geography, and how we have looked at it is around thinking about the secondary schools and the primaries that feed into those secondary schools. So there's a bit of a pathway for those children, young people, as they move through from primary to secondary education.
Thank you. Councillor Slatter, please.
Yes, if I could come back on that, I think I'm going to move on. I'll be dealing with this yet again in another committee, because I think this is where the connectors can come in, because they do a great job in making sure that they know what the social prescribers are doing, and they know what the local district council community development people are doing, as well as the health side. So as long as they know where the mental health teams are starting up and how they can help them flourish, that will be very useful, I think. So hopefully the Cosmic Committee also will be wanting to play a part in this, and that we all want to make it work. Thank you.
Councillor Daunton, please.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not sure whether I should have declared an interest as a governor of CPFT, but I think not, because it's a county appointed governor. But so I do want to just make a comment on the section on the eating disorder service. I think you've set this out very well in the report, and I know that there's waiting times are a big issue. There is also another issue, and that is referrals out of area. And I think that has been a problem, and I don't know whether you can comment on that, what your experience of that is, referrals out of area.
Do you mean children? Do you mean Cambridgeshire children being referred out of area, or children out of area being referred
yes,
into Cambridgeshire
particularly
services?
inpatients. Yeah.
Inpatients. So inpatient services are commissioned not within the Integrated Care System Board. They are commissioned through the Provider Collaborative, but certainly what we try and do, and there is a work to get children to be supported as close to home. However, there has been, particularly through the pandemic, a real challenge around the availability of what we call Tier 4, which are the mental health inpatient beds. So there has been a real challenge around that. And unfortunately, some young people have had to go out of the local area, and also if they had particular need. I mean, we're fortunate we do have a general adolescent bed unit, and we also have an eating disorder unit in Cambridge, as I'm sure you're aware. So, you know, there is a facility there, but it very much does depend on capacity and need at the time. But there's always a desire to make sure we support children as close to home as possible. But there has been challenges during the pandemic around that. I don't know the numbers at this precise moment in time of who are out of area.
Okay. Can I ask another question as well? On this, that's to do with schools, with your work in schools. You've commented on that already, but I just want to ask for a bit more information about how you approach schools, whether you wait for schools to come to you, whether you feel that more could be done to make the outreach to schools more effective.
So so the emotional wellbeing service and the emotional wellbeing practitioners that are noted in the report, that came about from work that we did with stakeholders back in 2016, 2017, was where schools were saying actually they wanted more support. So very much what the emotional wellbeing practitioners teams do, they will actively go out and support children and actually go to schools. I do apologise. So they will actively go out to schools and try and engage them in schools. We also do send information out in the schools newsletter. The forums, schools are invited to attend. So there is a lot of active work that goes on to engage schools. It is also up to schools how much they want to engage back in the process. But that's why we've tried to look at forums, so like peer support. And I think one of the things that was identified over COVID, we used to have a lot of these in person, and actually that did restrict school staff taking time out, and actually the virtual forums have been quite useful, although now they are starting to implement going back into schools. So there has been a lot of active outreach. Some schools have been, majority of schools have been very engaged. There still are some that do, don't engage for various reasons. So it's a bit of a mixed model how they respond, but we do actively go out to them.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Hoy, please.
Yes, thank you. I could say loads, but obviously I know we're pressed for time, so I'll limit it just to the very, very pertinent point. Firstly, I was very shocked to see the 25% target, having a sort of only quarter of those in need accessing services is a massively low target, and I was gobsmacked, to be honest. And obviously it's a national target, but I do think that it does show that the NHS perhaps doesn't take mental health very seriously, to be honest, because I just don't understand why they'd set the target so low. Firstly, my question is actually for Nicola, oddly. Just on, obviously, if children are placed in Cambridgeshire from other counties, either on like a full care order or section 20, something like that, should we presume that they would access our mental health services?
So it's actually, I think, probably technically a health question, but I can answer it, and I'm sure Catherine can come in a minute. So when children are placed in a local authority, you remain their corporate parent. So if we place a child in Lincolnshire, we're still responsible for them, but their access to universal services, so education, so school, for example, a school in Lincoln, they would go to a school in Lincolnshire, and that would be paid for by Lincolnshire, if you like, or by the school. And similarly, they would access mental health services or ordinary physical health services in that local authority. And that's going back to the point that Councillor Bragner was very helpfully making for me. That's one of the reasons we struggle with the initial health assessments, because although there are children in care, it is that local health authority that's needing to provide the service, and they will prioritise as they feel appropriate. So yes, if a child's placed in our area, the corporate parent remains, say, Lincolnshire in that instance, but they would be able to access our services, yes.
Yeah, thank you. That was my understanding. And I think obviously we can't go into this today. I know pressed for time, and obviously, but I think it would be useful to have perhaps another committee or an outside discussion about this, because we know there are so many private providers, particularly in Fenland, given the cheaper housing. And I just feel that almost we're kind of dealing with a lot of issues from other councils where they're placing perhaps children and young people in Cambridgeshire. And although it's not directly costing us as a council, because obviously their council are paying for it, it is having impact on services like this, because if they are accessing mental health services, that is going to be putting a real strain on our local services. So I think we need to potentially look at that. Just two very quick points regarding the wellbeing practitioners. That was what I was speaking about many months ago regarding schools saying that when they're making referrals, they're being told that the children are kind of too high need and that they aren't suitable to access that service. And I guess that's sort of reflected in the paper when it says that it is for mild to moderate mental health issues. So I suppose what happens when they are kind of not rejected, that's maybe the wrong word, but when they're assessed and they're told they can't help. And on the assessments, the assessments don't actually tell us anything, because if you've done 600 assessments but 500 children you've said you can't help, that's actually, it doesn't mean anything. So it would have been useful to have how many children actually accessed help as a result of that. And then just the final point was on CAMH, obviously we've been told that service is available, but again, we've got no figures. We don't know how many children had a successful treatment as a part of that, and also the waiting times, because we all know that waiting times are absolutely massive at the moment, and that's not quantified in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, I suppose just to go through those few points. So thank you, Councillor Hoy. So yes, children out of area do access our services, so they do use some of our resource. So they may well, if you know, a number of the ones you were referring to around in the placements, they could end up in our acute services, and then often will have access our mental health crisis. So that's probably a wider discussion. So in terms of the emotional wellbeing service, so they don't deliver intervention specifically with young people. They will support the professional, but who will provide the interventions as children wellbeing practitioners. The children wellbeing practitioners are new roles that were brought in probably about 4 to 5 years ago, and they are quite specifically trained people to deliver specific guided self-help interventions. So it is limited in terms of the number of and the type of young people they can support, and that's due to the level of training. As they obviously become more competent practitioners, they can start to see a more diverse range. However, we have had quite a throughput of that workforce. We've had sort of trainees, and then it's one of those roles that's often used to move on to further up the psychology professional development pathway. So I mean, I could go back to the service and see if they've got data in terms of actually, so you know, they've seen this, what happens, so the outcomes from that, we can ask that question for that. And then in regards to CAMS and treatment, as was noted at the beginning, so there was a paper that was presented last week which had further detail around some of the waiting time. So that information was shared and could be shared with members today, which they find that useful. We talked more detail around some of the data around number of young people waiting and the times.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Boulat, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief point to add to the conversation about data. I think it's good to see the improvements since 2016-17 in this access targets. Of course, there's more work to be done on this, but what I think would be really interesting for us as well as members is if we have any data collected from any of the services, especially around gender and socioeconomic background, and of course location as well. And especially I'll be particularly interested in terms of which groups of young people are least likely to access some of those services listed, and especially around gender. I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of addressing some of the stereotypes around accessing mental health support in the first place. So like we had the previous discussion around weight management, I think actually having this breakdown to know where we can target best our efforts would be really welcome. If such data exists, maybe there's not a point for today's debate, but maybe like a note or something that would be useful for members if it's if you can collect this easily from some of the services, if they actually collect this data from the people who access it. Thank you.
Thank you. So the services do collate the gender data, and what we often see is the sort of below 12 and below, there's a slightly higher proportion of boys that access, and then as we move into sort of the teenage years, it kind of flips, so we get a large proportion of young girls over boys accessing. So I think that's reflected nationally in what's being shown in terms of the demand, but we do have that information, and also we have got some information on the socioeconomic. So again, in reference to the Adult and Health Committee last week, some of the data was looking at those from the most, we had some information on the most deprived deciles, and looking at where those sort of the postcodes for that. And one of the pieces of work we're looking at as a system is thinking about how we use population health to think about how we target those our areas most at risk, and actually how do we make sure the data is we're using that intelligence to help us focus the services to those that most at need. So I think we've still got some way to go on making sure we've got all that level of detail, but we do have that to some extent, and it's something we know that we need to work on.
Thank you. I think that's everybody who wanted to comment. I'd like to thank Catherine for bringing that to us, and thank the small child that I think came on screen briefly.
Yes.
We always appreciate children and young people being involved in this, so please do pass on our thanks. Thank you,
Yes.
Catherine.
Thank you.
Item 30. Oh no, report recommendations before I move on. Committee is being asked to note the services commissioned for children's mental health and wellbeing and the children's mental health strategy and priority areas, which we have done. Thank you. So the final report is agenda item 13, children and young people agenda plan, training plan and committee appointments. Rashenda, would you like to let us know of any changes, please?
No changes to report, Chair.
Thank you. So the agenda plan is as is. Councillor Slatter.
Yes, I don't know whether I slipped into the wrong feature. Just want to remind Conservative group that we're still lacking a member on the SACRE, Standing Advisory Committee on RE and World Views. And this can sometimes compromise the work of the committee if it's not quorate. So just to remind you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is the training plan, and members happy to take the training plan as noted. I'm seeing nods. So moving on to committee appointments. Councillor Nessinger has replaced Councillor Slatter as member of Corporate Parenting Subcommittee. We'd like to thank Councillor Slatter for all of her work that she has put in on that committee. We will need to appoint a new vice chair for this subcommittee from within its membership. So I would like to propose Councillor Nessinger. Do I have a seconder? Councillor King, thank you. Do we have any other nominations? Nope. I think we'll take that as approved in that case. Thank you. And congratulations to Councillor Nessinger. Very important role, I'm sure you'll all agree. Any other comments on committee appointments, please? Nope. Finally, we're being asked to note the local authority school governor nominations for the period April to July 2022. As always, I'd like to place on record the committee's thanks to all of those who give their time and expertise to support our schools in this way. Any comments on those, please? Which brings us to the end of today's business. Committee will next meet on Tuesday, the 29th of October, 2022. I now declare this meeting closed. Thank you all.